Evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking Landscape Photography, episode 91. Is that right, Lucky?
Yes, it is. Unbelievably.
Ooh, rock and rolling, boys. We're heading to the big 100. Look out. I have a big vested interest into tonight's show. Luke and I haven't really been sort of guests on our own show for a long time now. We've been getting all these fantastical people all around, and this is a bit of a mixture. It's myself and a bunch of guests. But before we jump into that, how's things the last few weeks, Lukey? What's been happening?
Well, I've been back and I've actually been chained to the computer desk doing editing. So I've probably delivered over 1,000 images in various formats and things. I've also been doing, re-edited a few photos that I had, like some of my favorite, probably more recognizable images. It was really rewarding to actually edit them from scratch using my newer noise reduction techniques for a lot of the night photography, and it's enabled me now to print them much larger. So the very complex and very lengthy edits, it probably spent a day on 2 images or 2 days on 2 images, but very rewarding to get. You can just, the difference in file quality is quite remarkable with some of the new software. And if you're interested in what I'm really excited about software wise, it's actually DxO Pure Raw, using that to actually process your raw files rather than the engine that Lightroom provides. It's really fantastic. So
look at David Malin Awards out this week.
Yeah, they had the David Malin Awards, and the results are, I got 2 highly commended in the smartphone photography section, actually. So yeah, there was always some interesting choices in the competition, but it was cool to see a nightscape win the overall competition again. Which
for people that don't know what it is, you want to
sort of competition, and the nightscapes are taking over now. So that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I always like to see nightscapes get a bit of time in the sun for sure.
Two things, Lucky. What is the David Malin Awards, and what exactly is a nightscape?
Well, David Malin Awards is one of the premier astrophotography competitions in Australia. It's judged by Dr. David Malin, who's a very, like, a world famous I guess deep space astrophotographer. He's done some of the most iconic astrophotography images of deep space that I guess you can do from Earth. Yeah, it's been running for, I think, 19 or quite a period of time, and I was lucky to actually win the competition overall a few years ago. And it's just a really great competition to get involved in if you're into astrophotography. I'd also have to say that this year, with Australian Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year having an astrophotography category, that's also going to be a bit of a contender as well in terms of a premier astro comp, even though it's not the main category.
You got 2 in the finals, don't you, Lucky? And I got 1. When do we find out about the winner?
The winner is announced in late August with that one. And I don't know if they're having an actual presentation you can attend or not. I haven't seen any invites flying around, so maybe that's a bad sign for me. But yeah, but yeah, just definitely if you're into astrophotography, definitely keep an eye out on the David Malin Awards, which normally entries are about May each year, and then also the new category for an Australian Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year, which has normally those entries close sort of around January. So yeah, so that's been a bit exciting to get involved with those, and yeah, hopefully get to Adelaide at some point and be able to see our work up on the walls in the South Australian Museum, which would be pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah, my understanding is that they're announcing the awards on a Thursday night, online, and on the Friday night, I believe they're doing a function for the photographers.
Oh, okay, cool. There you go. Yeah.
So my understanding. I'm not sure if
what did he win the portfolio award? Was it?
Last year with this one behind me here that I've got printed out at 40 inches was one of the
portfolio, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's the last time I was on your show. Actually, I presented a number of images that were part of that portfolio.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
I thought there was something special about those.
They're certainly teasing us and making it. They really stretch it out. It was over a month ago they announced a shortlist. You got to wait another 2 months to hear the finals. I don't know.
Well, just because I know you're both finalists, so good things come to those who wait, huh?
Yeah, we'll see. So I'm looking a bit wild and woolly because I actually just raced out of surfing, absolutely macking 4 to 5 foot barrels at this incredible break, a kilometre out to sea. It was just epic. One of the best surfs I've ever had in the last 10 years. It was like ridiculous. So race back in time for the show. But I've been shooting a lot and posting a lot more than usual. If you've been watching my personal Facebook page, there's just been so much incredible afterglow in the sky in the last 2 or 3 weeks from the volcanic ash. It's been amazing. And I thought it was kind of gone for the evening shoots. I milked it for about a week and a half. And then I actually was working on Bruny Island doing some shooting, and I got up like an hour and a half before dark to go do, tramp out to this freaking mountain before sunrise. But on the way, a full hour before sunrise, it was just going off its bananas in the sky. And I was like, maybe it shifted, that it was more hitting the sky in the mornings than it was in the evenings before, like in terms of where it is in the atmosphere. So that's been a super highlight for me. And it's had me really excited. I've got a lot of beautiful work. And I'm gearing up to go home to New Zealand to go see my family and judge the New Zealand Photography Awards next week. So trying to get a few P's and Q's in order. And I actually just entered the APP Awards, the Australian Photographic Prize Awards, and so I got asked to judge.
That close? Is that closed already, or is it?
No. They they just finished the early bird, I think last night or the night before, and then I was looking on the website and I saw, they've got this one speaker slot missing. So I actually just wrote them and said, "Hey guys, you got a missing speaker slot. How about me?" And they straight away said, "Sure, mate." So I'm getting the Epson slot for that, and funny enough, Epson's actually flying me to Melbourne next week for a day with a videographer to shoot a portfolio for the Epson Panel Awards.
Oh, wow.
And they selected a few judges and entrants. I don't know whether they chose a hairy bloke like me, but that's I haven't been in front of a camera for a long time, so that's going to be kind of weird and cool next week just before I head off. So I'm just getting my P's and Q's in order a little bit. And what I like about these awards, the Australian Photographic Prize, is it's a mixture of amateur digital and then open print awards. And I think only the pros are only allowed to enter the print awards, but to make it a lot more accessible and affordable for people, rather than doing the whole mounting thing, which ends up costing quite a lot, they've actually made it so all you need to do is print it on an A3 piece of paper and that's it. Okay. And which is very affordable. And if effectively, it's the same size and same caliber judges and the whole works, but the barrier for entering is a lot lower. So I was pretty excited about that, and I thought, I want to support this.
We've got a question too in YouTube from David Skinner about if we're entering Nlpa, which is the Natural Landscape Photography Awards that we had.
I was kind of like, do you put me year ahead? Because the first year entering, I won aerial, and I'm probably entering aerials, and I'm like, what are the chances of winning twice? Maybe I'll just skip it for a few years. But at the same time,
I felt the same way about the AusGeo Awards this year, actually.
Yeah,
but I did end up entering, and I came up donuts, which often photographers gloat about everything that we are awarded, but it's nice to be honest about the things that we're not. So.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think I've missed out for 4 years or something in AusGeo. I try it every year, so. And it's actually quite a hard competition to get into, and I had to wait until there was an Astro category before I could get back in again. So, you just got to keep trying sometimes. And you're dead right. You don't really hear about the losses so much as the wins.
Exactly.
So it's a bit like a gambler.
Yeah, we kind of suck those up in a quiet room, don't we?
But, I'm also
so to answer that question, I've just over the past couple of weeks been preparing a couple of projects. So you're allowed to enter 2 projects.
Oh wow.
So I've prepared 2 projects on a couple of the projects that I've been working on in the last 12 months, as well as some individual entries. So yeah, to answer that question, absolutely. And I think it's quickly becoming one of the premier competitions or landscape competitions. I'm really excited to submit to that competition.
Oh, definitely. Just even by entries alone, the entry numbers they had was quite unbelievable, actually.
14,000 in the first year.
It's very cost effective competition as well, in terms of how many entries you actually get for the money that you spend as well. Absolutely. So I'm actually going to enter as well this year, so I'm pretty excited about that. I didn't manage to get anything in last year, so yeah, pretty keen to. I think you have to have everything in by the end of August, is my understanding. So
yeah, that's partly why I'm trying to get my P's and Q's in order, because I'm only going to have whatever photos I got with me once I leave the house, and I'm probably going to be gone for a month and a half maybe. So I've been stuck away from my family for 3 years thanks to COVID, and I'm like, who knows what's happening in the future. So I thought I'd better get over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blessings. My poor old mum's like 81. She had COVID sort of 2 weeks ago, and it was like, but she's come through. God bless her, and she needs her son to come and spend some time with her. So I'll be doing that. That and the missing community. But I will give a little bit of a shout out to the APP Awards. It's in terms of something you can literally attend and see live judging with a lot of the best judges in this part of the world. There's probably nothing else in Australia like it still, and it will be combined with a really cool trade show and speakers and stuff as well.
So it's my understanding, Paul, that's they're trying to sort of use that as an APA replacement.
I don't know, like they've changed, they've changed the system around quite a lot, and they've made it a lot more affordable. They've separated different sort of aspects of amateur and pro. They've I think they've modernized it, made it more contemporary and accessible, and it's kind of its own thing. But
do they have a digital only as well? Or?
They do, and that's an amateur only, as in like the pros can't enter that. So what I like about that is that intimidation factor of trying to compete against, high-end people that can happen sometimes with APA is not there anymore. So I'd say probably no, it's kind of its own thing. There is certainly a lot of people involved, like Karen Alsop and Robin Campbell, that she was actually the head juror for APA, and they're super skilled people. But again, I love print and I love judging print, and I can't get enough. And as you're probably aware, if you hadn't been engaged with them before, being exposed to live judging with panels of 5 of the best live there's no better resource out there for learning about images. It's really quite incredible. So I didn't know that was kind of happening before I said yes to New Zealand. So I'm literally flying from one to the other. But I'm missing community, and I think it's another reason they wanted to keep it going. Is there's a big gap in the Australian photographic professional community with the APP going down, and it's hopefully going to sort of not, just give people a place to reconnect again, and just maybe start afresh and just celebrate their craft. It's quite a solo pursuit often, photography for most people professionally, especially, and I personally have found community just super, super healthy for my overall well-being, not to mention all that I've learned. But I'm pretty keen to get started on these lovely men here. We haven't even introduced them yet.
Yes,
so
that's right.
Tonight's show is about a very, very special journey. I'll hand it over to David pretty quickly because it came from him. And so we have David Dahlenburg from South Australia and Tim Wrate from Sydney, who are both incredibly talented aerial photographers, amongst other things. And funny enough, even though we spent years planning this trip, we hadn't actually physically met till the moment we stepped foot on soil in Adelaide and started the trip. It was kind of like we felt like we knew each other already, and we kind of realized, hey, wait a minute, I haven't actually seen, like real life person. And I just downloaded the photo on my phone of the very first time we met, because I was like, we got a selfie with this, boys.
Like a long
settle in for a couple of hours. If we spill over, we'll try not to. Then we might let ourselves if it's all sounding really interesting. But we're going to try and introduce a beautiful film tonight that documents the whole thing. Zoom's not the best platform to do that, so we did a few tests and went, oh god, but we'll give it a go. And either way, we actually have a few things that we're launching online tonight, including access to the video. So we'll give it a whirl, and you can put up with it when we get to it and go from there. But I'm going to hand the reins over to David, and we'll get the ball rolling.
Cool. Well, thanks, Paulie. So the journey sort of started, as Paul said, a couple of years ago. I'd spent the best part of the last 5 years flying around South Australia and going to some pretty far away places. And I wanted to push myself a little bit further. And that's, I've been talking to Paul for a while on the telephone never met, but we sort of had a bit of a connection there. And Tim's name came up a few times, and we liked his style. So we had a bit of a concept about pushing into faraway places, like seldomly seen places. Anyway, I reached out with the concept to Paul and Tim, and they jumped on board in about 10 seconds, I think.
Five.
So
Was that slow, Paul? I thought it was a nanosecond for me.
yes. So as soon as the guys jumped on board, then the mine started racing. I had a few nights where I was lying in bed, just couldn't sleep, boys. I was just thinking, how far can we push it? Like how far can we go? And one of the things I really wanted to push was going to places where people don't normally go, which has a whole lot of logistics surrounded that, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So I guess after we got the commitment to go, we all went away and looked at Google Earth and maps, and then had a few Zoom meetings where went for, instead of going for 10 minutes or 20 minutes like we planned, we probably talked for 3 or 4 hours until the wee hours. And we all on the same page about going further, really. So we decided on a bit of a path we'd follow, and then the next step was getting my good friend and pilot Steve on board, and he was pretty keen. I'd travelled around South Australia a few times with Steve, and we've become really good mates. As you guys know, he's just a top bloke, great guy to fly with, and he was very keen to jump on board. So then we gave him some destinations and some flight plans, and he came back the next day and said, not sure if it's going to be able to happen because the distances were too far. But Steve, being the top bloke he is, he's got contacts all around South Australia, and he rang in a few favours from some cattle stations out west, and we could do fuel dumps. So that made it all possible. So it was almost a bit surreal, guys, when we touched down after our first leg and pulled up into an old tin shed with a 44-gallon drum, and we're pumping fuel by hand. But that's sort of what it took to go to the places we wanted to go to.
We owe a lot to Steve. Like it's basically not the kind of trip that's very repeatable at all, and it lent very heavily on Steve's local knowledge and personal contacts that have been building up over 30 years in this sort of country, and the logistics of landing in very, very remote fields that probably a lot of people don't even know exist, and literally some of them are just dirt strips and there's just nothing there, absolutely nothing. And it was big props to our brother. We're going to be talking him up a bit during the show because he's an absolute champion. And David and Steve together just knocked heads for ages and really pulled together something super special. And my 10 cents, if David hasn't finished his first leg.
One thing I wanted to touch on was some of the places we visited. We've definitely a gamble. Like there's some places in South Australia, like as you guys know, like Air. You know what you're going to get. It's going to be good. It's going to be pretty specky. But we took a few chances, especially out west, where I looked at it on Google Earth for quite a few years and couldn't really get my head around the logistics and if it would be worth the travel. But I guess we took the punt, guys, and I think it definitely paid off. And the other part of the concept I want to touch on is I wanted to bring back really original work, like stuff you don't see every day. And I think one of the only ways to achieve that is to take some risks and go to these really remote parts of the state. And for us, it paid off, I guess. So some of the best stuff I saw was new stuff. So
yeah, I if I can, Dave, and I mean this in the most sincere way possible, getting to know you was really special to me, and being part of the journey and to share that with Paul and yourself, specifically yourself, Dave, the fact that you are a 5th generation South Australian, how deep your roots go there, the fact that you know that country like the back of your hand, the fact that you grew up traveling a lot of the country that we flew over, and seeing how you connected with the country and how you interacted with the country and how both you and Steve, like the chemistry was just palpable when you guys were out bush. And, you know, here's a couple of South Aussie boys born and bred who were exploring their own backyard, and that was really special to witness. So I just want to extend a thank you to yourself for inviting both Paul and myself along that journey. But I just want to let you know that, yeah, it was really special to witness kind of your relationship with your own backyard.
Yeah, much appreciated, mate. I'm glad you brought it up because as a child, my parents were into land conservation. So we did a lot of land conservation from near the town I grew up in, Nlpa, which is not far from Perry, where Steve's from. So we did local work, but then we spent a lot of time as children driving around the state and going to some of these places that we visited in this trip, actually. But they're quite remote, like some places way out west where just dirt tracks. But yeah, what I think is really special is seeing these places from the ground as a child, and then, you know, revisiting them from the air. And as you know, it's a totally different perspective. Like I remember
it is. I mean, it may seem a bit of a cliche, and it's something that I use a little bit. But what can seem ordinary from the ground can be extraordinary from above, and especially in South Aussie, that's such an ancient, remote, flat landscape. That, you know, when you're in a car and you're traveling, it is flat and hours can pass by and nothing but red out the window. But the minute that you take off, the world changes.
Yeah.
And to see you and your relationship with your own backyard, yeah, like I said, it was just really special.
Yeah. Well, I sort of sat down a few weeks ago to do a bit of writing, and I had to write about why aerial photography. And I was thinking back to my childhood. I wasn't into photography as a child, but there was an aerial photo of my grandfather's farm. So the farm was sort of in our family for 5 generations. They settled some of the land up, you know, where I was born in Nlpa. And back in the 80s, there was a guy who used to fly around the state and take photos and then sell the photos to farmers. And I remember as a kid looking at this photo on my grandfather's wall, and I could see outside and it looked nothing like it at all. Like it gave a whole new perspective to my surroundings. And my first trip I actually flew with Steve, we detoured, it's only about 10 k's from the airport, and flew over the family farm, and so it sort of brought me back to that little kid gazing at the photo on the wall. So sort of a nice way to start my aerial photography journey, really. But,
if I can indulge myself, there's part of our intention in pulling together this project was to explore the cultural, historical and modern history or legacy written into the landscape of South Australia. And if I can kind of just reflect on the historical component, there's a famous aviator by the name of Nancy Bird Walton, and she was Australia's first female aviator, and she got her pilot's license at the age of 19 in the 1930s. And she was known as the Angel of the Outback. And she's got a quote that really resonates, and I think ties back to Dave's story there, where she said, the beauty of the air, from the air, you haven't seen Australia unless you've seen it from the air. The coastline, the colours of the inland, the clay pans, the forests, it's all just so beautiful. You'll never see that from the road. People climb mountains to see these things, but you see that every time you take off. And collectively, we took off, I think it was 16 times, and we landed 16 times. We spent 20 odd hours in an aircraft, and every time we took off, I think I can speak on behalf of the three of us here, we felt that, and we saw new things and we felt new things. And I hope that's that intention and that feeling is something that we can portray in our images.
Yeah, most definitely.
I if I can jump in, there's a lot of layers to a project like this. I mean, the first thing initially is collaboration and the power of collaboration and the opportunity to learn and grow from other artists is really a really huge part of a project like this, and definitely what drew me to it in the first place. Like two really talented people with their own styles and ways of seeing it in a genre that I personally deeply love. That's not that common to get to do. You know, there's so much of my flying on my own, and we'll get into what it's like to fly with three photographers at the same time. That's no. I was always like, oh shit, how's this going to work? We'll get into that, but that was definitely one of the great appeals. And again, as Tim iterated, to go with someone like Dave, who had such a deep, ensconced history and written into this landscape, and we felt quite clearly in that started inspiring us to create this container around the project that it was going to be South Australian based. And when we thought about what we have access to as aerial photographers that few people can witness as easily or as clearly or as evocatively as we can, is that multi-layered conceptual aspect that Tim alluded to, the indigenous aspect of it, the raw physicality of it, the spiritual aspect, the historical aspect, and the modern way it's being shaped as a landscape as well. And we'll get into that through our images, and we'll peel away some of the layers on those concepts as we go through. But they're kind of the 3 or 4 kind of overlapping themes that we wanted to weave through the whole project with a bit of depth and thoughtfulness and cohesiveness. And that's been kind of our aim for the whole project. And that means putting a lot of time in and doing a bit of research and being a bit thoughtful and being quite meticulous about your plans and the way aerial photography works. You plan certain shoots and certain routes, but actually when you get out there, it's kind of all out the window, so to speak. You respond to what's present to you in a landscape when you see it, because it's quite dynamic and it changes. And South Australia is raw, it's powerful, and it just has this absolutely phenomenal, like flood drought kind of contrast in terms of the way the landscape's been shaped. And it's shaped, the resources and waterways and food sources with the indigenous people for absolutely millennia, and you can see that written into the landscape. And that was quite amazing to sort of think of just how raw and challenging and arid and fierce a place it must have been to try and create a sustainable living out of. And that was one of the big striking points of this trip to me. And witnessing, the areas around Birdsville and the Gann Railway and physically looking at the landscape that they had to forge their way through. And like, no wonder it took them freaking 80 years to put that railway through to Darwin. It was like, and even now in modern times, that is a really challenging and potentially dangerous place to travel. And over all that millennia, that really hasn't changed that much. And I know that was one of the areas that we're all particularly drawn, that far northeast, that, we'd all photographed and flown over areas of South Australia before, but we hadn't done anything as comprehensive or as broad or as diverse as a project like this all at the same time.
Yeah, no, well said, Paulie. You touched on the waterways, and that's one of the things I really love about the aerial perspective of South Australia, is that when you're up there, you can see the ancient riverways, like the whole state, like it's dry outback, but you can see these ancient watercourses with fingers going through the desert. Like that's the feeling I really get when I'm up in the 2,000 or 3,000 feet up. It's just the raw sort of power of the landscape. It keeps me going back, because you can find interesting features which, like you said, you wouldn't see from the road, but they're not places people would plan to fly over. But it's like a tapestry of layers. You've got, the vegetation, you've got the ancient water courses, and together they just sort of tell a story. Like I don't know, just a very interesting place to shoot, I guess.
It's a fierce, wild place. Yeah. And I think it's a real privilege to see it so comprehensively. And I think when you really dive into it and you see so much of a place in one go, the threads that join everything together becomes a lot more apparent. You're not just picking up on little pockets of things that you might be drawn to from a purely sort of aesthetic or artistic perspective. You're really getting a sense of the bigger picture of how this landscape was shaped and how we're shaping it now. And we refer to that, we're talking about, we flew over a lot of, coal mines and uranium mines and salt works and different things. And they're often very, very tucked away, very hidden from view. And even if you did want to go there, you probably wouldn't get permission, and you wouldn't get a sense of the scale of how it's shaping the landscape anyway from a ground perspective. And we thought about that quite deliberately, and we did make a point of actually covering a lot of these places and being a little bit more, I guess, open and transparent about the holistic aspect of a landscape. And we've probably created a contemporary kind of modern snapshot of where the South Australia is in terms of the elements of its physical being, across a broad area. And that's quite relevant, I think, and it's a reference point for the future as well as a very telling expose on how things are being shaped in a way that people may not be aware of at all.
Yeah, definitely.
I was doing a little bit of reading today, and there's Tim Parkin has a magazine called On Landscape, and one of the contributors on the magazine that was released today was Guy Towell, and he was talking about the different values of artwork, and he was kind of going deep in terms of, and he's quite philosophical, and he kind of leaned into trying to break down the values being the aesthetic value of artwork, and obviously that's quite obvious, and that talks to the beauty of things. But then, interestingly, and I'd never actually thought about this way, but the expressive value of artwork, whereby you can convey or arouse different emotions. And in aerial photography, particularly on the journey that we went on, where we aimed to capture intrigue, mystery, or wonderment, and then kind of just reflecting on what Paul just said about the man-made landscape, that can often lean into feelings of like frustration or disappointment. And then lastly, there's the cognitive value of artwork, which is kind of what contributes to a broadening of knowledge or depth of understanding. And that really resonated with me, because the journey that we went on and the images that we captured certainly broadened and deepened my understanding and my depth of relationship with the South Australian landscape.
Yeah, I think having, like we mentioned, 20 hours of flight time really fleshes that out. Like you can indulge in seeing this man-made landscapes, like altered landscapes, but at the same time we can also see, like, I guess a lot of people probably photograph salt lakes, but by having the extra time in the air, we can follow the tributaries that feed those salt lakes. So it's sort of like a bit of self-discovery. You're not just seeing the end result, you're seeing all the build-up.
Formation.
Yeah, it's like a deeper understanding of how it all works. And I think because the northern part of the state is so flat, you can really see how these little ancient waterways are carved over, let's face it, millions of years, and how it all works together and where it floats into the lowest part of the country, Lake Eyre. So it's really interesting to have more time to really, to understand that process, I guess.
And I had a few questions on YouTube, actually. First of all, did you fly with the doors off most of the time?
No, we
no can do for a flight that big.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible. Ideally, you would fly doors off, but we're not returning to the same runway. So, I'll be honest, I had a few times, we'd committed to the trip, and I got quite nervous, thinking, how are three of us going to shoot? Is this going to be a disaster?
So did I, mate. So did I.
I think we had a chat at one stage, and we sort of said, well, we're committed now. But to be honest, after our journey was completed, that was probably one of the most satisfying parts about it, how we all worked so well as a team. And I don't think anyone felt left out, or because we agreed that we just rotate through the plane, clockwise. And
well, actually, not at first. At first, we were targeting certain areas we wanted to be in the front of the plane for, and we were like, oh, I want to shoot this, or someone wants to shoot that, and we were landing enough that when we landed, we could swap seats. But as the trip went on, the equality and just the spirit of the whole thing is like, we're just all in this together. We'll get what we get. It's such a huge, long journey anyway. And you might surprise yourself with what you get when you're in that sort of box seat, as it were. And so we just actually completely let all of that go, and we just cycle around. Whose turn is it? Whoop, there you go, next, regardless of where we're going or what we were shooting. And
we also allowed a lot of extra fuel that we knew we were going from point A to point B, but we knew we were going to find stuff along the way. So we made sure we had regular stops and got as much fuel as we could each time, so we could go around in circles. And then the guy who was on the opposite side of the plane, we could do figure eights, so the guy in the worst seat would still get some really good quality time shooting at the window. So
I think just to specifically answer the question, we had a window that was about the size of a computer screen. So that was what we had to work with between the three of us. And like the boy said, by the end of the trip, it was
and this to shoot through.
Yeah, exactly. There were wing struts and landing gears and all sorts. But by the end of the trip, and as you'd expect, kind of after 20 hours of practice, it was a bit of a well choreographed dance. I think it was. We were moving in tandem almost.
Yeah, there's a few elbows flying around for a lot of the time, mate. What's my trick?
Yeah.
Little bit of FOMO on the wrong side of the plane when you're banking over, and all you can see is a bunch of clouds, and there's some epic stuff over there. Like, oh man,
yeah.
And what we did, Lukey, which was a little bit unusual, is that Steve actually had a window that he could open as well on his side of the plane, and he was quite comfortable doing that. So when you open the window, you have to slow the speed of this plane down considerably, so you can't just randomly just throw it open when you see something good. And we also set up a Lenskirt on the kind of so-called offside of the plane. And what we also knew, which was a huge advantage and made it a lot more palatable, was the perspex in the plane had been quite recently replaced and was in excellent condition for visibility itself. So I actually ended up shooting quite a lot through the window, like mainly using the Lenskirt. And Lenskirt is so that.
But that was actually one of the questions, was what you did with the window reflection. So either you were shooting out the window with it up, or you were slide it across, I guess, or through the Lenskirt through the perspex.
So Lenskirt is basically just a piece of material that's made of like black velvet, which just absorbs sort of light reflections, and it's usually square on the end. There's different sizes, and it has suction cups that you put on the window. And we literally just permanently just slammed it on the window and just kept it there. And then it narrows down to the end and just can kind of like gently seal around your lens or around your camera. So it pretty much limits all reflections, because that is a huge aspect of trying to shoot out of a window. And
yeah, this is one here. It's probably going to not work very well with looking for my face, but you can see the suction cups on the end there.
Yeah.
And it's just going to block it out, isn't it? But that's
green screen
sort of size of it there as well. So you can see how well it's going to block out the light with the reflections.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I travel with them in commercial airlines and places like that, so at least I can try and get something. But again, it wouldn't always be really that palatable, but because the perspex was already so new and so clean, it was still worth doing. And it was kind of like, do you sit there and not take anything, or do you just, maybe take that 20% hit in the resolution and give it a go? And I actually found quite a lot of the shots in there quite usable, to be honest.
Yeah.
Did you guys have to go to the bathroom up there at all? That was one of the questions.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was in my mind as well. I was like 4 guys in a plane, and it basically was a Cessna 182. So it's not a big plane. So you're getting pretty cozy with each other. Yeah. And Steve straight away said, yeah, no, mate, I've got like 3.5 hours in my bladder. So I don't know what the longest stint we did, maybe 4.
Probably, yeah, it would have been a good 4-hour trip at one stage down. Yeah, but the good thing, Steve's an awesome pilot, really safe, and he wants to have regular stops. So it's really good. We get out, we can regroup, collect our thoughts, have a stretch.
Not only is Steve an amazing pilot, but just an incredible man. The spirit of generosity that he shared with us, the humor, everything that
the patience of dealing with these guys. Oh, what about this? What about that? Oh, can we go back again? Oh, can we do another figure eight? We could drive most people insane. So.
Absolutely, but I mean, the chemistry, and I don't use that word lightly, but of the 4 of us.
Yeah, it was magic.
And, Steve was as a bigger part of the journey as the three of us who were presenting here tonight.
Hugely.
Definitely a top part of the team. Made it possible, and without him, there's no way we could have achieved what we achieved. That's for sure.
And you got to remember, he's been flying this country for 30 years, so his own personal knowledge is huge. Yeah. But what he admitted to, and I think that already started in the time that he'd been spending flying with David, is it actually has been transforming the way that he sees his own country, and the place that he, in his own way, probably thought he knew pretty well. And that was maybe one of the benefits that Steve maybe gained. We actually asked him to come on the show tonight. And he was like, "Oh, it's all good, boys. You guys have fun. I'll watch it after." But he is in the film, and he's really proud of the project, and he's really stoked with what we're doing, and he's super behind it. He's been such a champion.
Yeah, we had a good chat this morning, Paulie, and we touched on that. How first time I went up, he's like, "Oh, why do you want to go there?" It's like, "Oh, I just want to shoot some stuff," and I was pretty shy. I didn't want to give him too many orders, but like I said, such a nice bloke. Within half an hour, he's like, "Just tell me, mate. Tell me where you want to go." And we've got this chemistry, and we've flown. I've been in the plane probably 60 hours with Steve over the last 5 years.
Wow.
And it's pretty natural. It's just like I said, extension of your tripod. He puts you where you want to be. And what we talked about this morning was he's used to, going from A to B, the most economic route. But we're not about that. We're doing figure eights, and we're exploring different countries, and there's places that Steve wouldn't have flown unless these crazy photographers want to see it. So
guys, we've done 45 minutes without showing a picture yet. So we can either try Timmy or we can try you, Lukey. In terms of
let's do it. I'll do it.
I'll
share my screen.
We're expecting it to be jumpy and not perfect, guys. It's about 9 or 10 minutes. It's actually got, I don't know how many hours of footage behind it, freaking hundreds, but it's a really nice summary of the journey.
Enjoy.
We're seeing a lot of you, Tim.
Really?
It's the biggest screen. At least I know, so I am. There's just something different about exploring country from an aerial perspective. It's just the way you see and understand the landscape. It kind of reveals a level of interconnectivity between all things. The shape and the geomorphology of a landscape, even the creation stories of how the land actually came into being. That's part of the magic of aerial photography.
Aerial photography to me is the pinnacle of photography. I feel like I can express the landscape in a different way. South Australia has a massive diversity in landscape, and it's captured so well with aerial photography. You have desert, sweeping desert vistas, we have salt lakes, we have industrial areas which look amazing from the air, and most people don't get a chance to see that. To showcase it in an artistic manner is a dream I'm really passionate about. I was taking aerial photos over the last 4 or 5 years around South Australia, and I wanted to push myself a bit further. So I reached out to Paul and Tim to see if they'd be on board with a bit of an outback odyssey and some sort of project, and to my delight they jumped on board straight away.
So David spent a lot of time poring over maps and coming up with a really quite ambitious flight plan, which really got us to some of the more remote places and places that very few people have photographed from the air.
I'll be laying in bed at night thinking about different travel plans, different routes, how far we can go, how far we can push this project.
At the onset of this expedition, I was really excited to get up north of Lake Eyre and explore the desert country, but most specifically the Channel country and Goyder's Lagoon.
What really excited me about this trip is the opportunity to explore a huge range of the entire state in one go. So the phenomenal potential for variety, from man-made to landscapes and iron ore mines and salt farms, huge open expanses. Channel country in particular is somewhere I've never had a chance to explore.
To be in the same plane, shoot in the same location together is going to be really, really special.
We took off from Port Pirie with no real agenda other than to follow our lenses and capture how we interpret the landscape from the air. It was quite an incredible experience taking off, and within 20 minutes we were flying over the Whyalla salt flats, exploring our visual interpretation of the textures, the rhythms, the colours, the patterns. It was really quite something special.
So when you approach a location, you see something that sparks your interest, and then you start pre-visualising what you're going to see. And then it's all about communication. So we're directing the pilot where to go, where to bank, to get us in the position we need to be to capture the shot as we imagine it.
When you're photographing in a plane, it's really crucial that you have a strong relationship with your pilot. We were utterly spoilt with Steve. They say when you're in an aircraft, the aircraft is really your tripod. And we were really lucky that Steve was just an extension of our lens.
It really astounds me just how well the Indigenous people of this incredibly arid and seemingly inhospitable landscape learn to adapt and survive and even thrive in a place that's this harsh. And similarly, the early pioneers, explorers and settlers had to find their way to overcome these incredible challenges themselves.
So when I saw industrial aerial photography for the first time, it really changed my perspective on the way humans have impact on the landscape. And even in South Australia, we have remote locations where there's mines and there's hundreds of k's away from where anyone lives. But to see it from the air, it brings it back to home that we are having an impact, and all the things we do to the environment make a difference.
There's a huge economic element to our culture that relies on fossil fuel, in particular their extraction, and Australia is essentially, the economy is really built on it. So I think what can happen is those processes happen really remotely, and it's very rare that people have the actual access to understand what's actually happening to the landscape as a result. And I think as aerial photographers, we're in an unusual and particular position where we can unveil a lot of those processes and bring them to light and bring them into the collective consciousness and conversation as a society. We have a body of work, I feel, that will stand the test of time and create an incredible accessibility to the ancient power of this land and this landscape, this country, that few people will ever be able to experience.
We're not just documenting the outback visually, we're telling a story. We're creating art which is intriguing and mysterious.
I really hope that our portfolio can speak to the spirit and the power of this country.
So 20 hours of flying later, 20,000 images and 4,000 kilometers of country covered, we've really amassed a wonderful collection of images to speak to our ongoing understanding and depth of relationship with this country.
Oh.
And the crowd goes, whoa, they gave me goosebumps, boys. That is our, we didn't get a chance to pump it up at the beginning, but that is the inaugural release of the Altitude South mini film documentary that we have not shared publicly anywhere in the world. So you're the very first to see that on the show. And geez,
and you did the video, Paul.
What's that?
You did most of the video work.
Yeah. And
well done.
Yeah, it did actually. And it was it wasn't without its challenges, because I was jumping in the deep end with sound, and occasionally we'd be like, oh man, we nailed that interview. That was a good hour and a half, wasn't it? And I realized like I hadn't plugged in one particular chord, or I'd be like, oh, Dave, I just noticed on that whole interview, there's this blue flashing light on your neck and it makes you look like a robot. And I was like, oh, I don't see that. And then it would be like, we'd set up a whole nother camera and it was slightly forward, and it would be our second camera to cut from one to the other. And we got it back and realized it was just wind sound coming through the entire time. And it wasn't easy. Tim and I were taking turns with our GoPros about who was willing to risk it on the wing and not be there when we land. And it's sort of,
it was the first time I just bought that GoPro, and the first time I'd ever used it, I was gaffer taping it to the wing of the 182 and flying at 4,000 feet.
We had no tape the first time. We stopped for petrol.
We like, oh, should we do it with no tape?
I was like, well, you can borrow some of my tape if you want it. So yeah, thanks, mate.
So we all took a few turns kind of doing a bit of phone stuff. Like whoever was in the front seat filmed all the landings and takeoffs, for instance. And we've got this really interesting 16-time takeoff and 16-time landing kind of aspect to the story, which I thought was pretty cool. And we might produce something that literally jumps from one to the other as you're landing in. So you get a sense of the diversity of the landscape in a really quick go. And Dave and I spent another few days doing interviews and sort of trying to flesh out the depth of the project and the intentionality behind it, and more kind of weight and I guess depth, to all those kind of facets of it, the historical aspect and the Indigenous aspect and the modern kind of, modern influence of different things. And it really helped us crystallize in a way more how we want to present it to the world. And the video is kind of, it does a pretty good job. It's funny, like we've done all this talking and I realized that kind of just says so much without us saying a word. So a little bit proud of that one, boys, that we managed to pull that together. It's got a nice pace to it. And my good friend Miles did all the editing work, who's a good brother of mine down here. David, you go, mate.
Yeah, I was going to say, a nice part of the process was the intentionality of actually trying to put our thoughts into words. Quite often, you'll go away by yourself and you've got all these emotions when you get back and all the things you've seen, but to share it with you guys, it makes it a lot more special. And it really, you have a deeper appreciation of what we achieved and how we shared it with Steve and you guys. Like it's definitely enriched my experience by thinking about it and talking about it and producing this short film. So
definitely. Paul touched on it, but I just might quickly share a couple of behind the scenes videos that we captured along the way, just to kind of give a little bit more context. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
So Paul just mentioned it, but yeah, every takeoff and landing we filmed, and whoever was in the front seat would hold out their iPhone or their smartphone and put it on the dashboard and film whether we were taking off or landing. And this just gives an example of some of the bumpy rural runways that were kind of corrugated and potholed that we were landing on across the outback.
We gave Steve a round of applause nearly every landing, I think. We're pretty appreciative of his skill, that's for sure.
That was one of my favorite runways. There was absolutely nothing there. There was just this dirt strip and a windsock, which wasn't even doing a very good job. But the clouds and that contrast between the rich orange of the earth and the blues of the sky and those kind of what I call Simpson clouds.
Yeah.
It was 360 degrees the whole way around, and it was just like, wow, we're really out here, guys. And I think when you land somewhere that's so far away from any sort of residence or humanity, it's quite a special to just be present there for a while. And I think we were there for about half an hour and just kind of just really soaking in and getting the dust on our feet and being a bit more present to being in a really remote sort of, raw, wild part of South Australia, which we got the privilege to do 16 times over.
Yeah, and not only did we land on public runways, but we also landed on a number of private ones. In fact, the very first runway that we landed on belonged to a sheep station out west of where we took off. And I'll just quickly play a video of this was just our first experience within kind of 2 hours of taking off. It was all very kind of hyper speed. We landed in Adelaide, we drove up to the airport, we went shopping and we collected all of our groceries. We took off, and within 2 hours we were at a remote sheep station and filling up from petrol drums. So I'll just play this one here, if that's okay.
Old school, baby.
Yep. I love.
And that's how we fueled the plane, by hand from drums in a remote cattle station or sheep station.
That was actually his driveway, basically, and the house is right behind us.
Yeah,
we pretty much drove up to his front door, and first thing I got greeted by was this beautiful sheepdog, which was trying to jump in the plane. It was so gorgeous, and then we taxied right into the guy's kind of basically house, just about, and then we got invited in for tea and snacks and stuff on the station, which was really delightful.
Oh, look, and that speaks to Steve's relationships that he's developed over time with station owners and some of the characters that are dotted around the remote parts of South Australia. The fact that, our one job that morning was to go to the bakery and pick up some finger buns so we could hand deliver them to these lovely station owners. I mean, that's the type of story and the type of experience that we had on this journey.
And the other nice thing was we sat around the kitchen table, and he said, "There's one spot, you're heading that way anyway. Check this spot out." And it was just gold. What we've had that tip.
We weren't going to go there.
Yeah, it was had that local knowledge as well. It's really, really valuable. So,
what sort of area was this then, if you can divulge? Where you first started?
So it was, we took off from Port Pirie, as mentioned in the video. And this was a couple of hours to the west in an area called the Gawler Ranges.
Oh, right.
So yeah, it was incredible. They'd obviously had a little bit of rain, and it was just these beautiful red rolling hills that was kind of pockmarked by all these kind of spinifex shrubs, and it was bright red, kind of punctuated by these bright green.
Green, it was beautiful colour palette.
Just incredible, yeah.
And even he said it's hardly ever been like this. And going back actually before this project, we haven't really talked about the fact that it took 2 years to pull this off, and we had some false starts. And a few weather issues. I'll let you finish this, Tim, and then I might go into that.
No, I'll just take up a couple more minutes. The next thing I've got here is just us kind of on one of our long legs, when we weren't shooting, just kind of some of the mischief that we got up to in the aircraft.
And look, it's
the first time that I'd ever put my hands on the joystick or on the steering wheel of an aircraft. And, it behaves and acts differently than a car, but a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yep.
I was looking over going, he's really Tim fly. I was like, all right, mate, there you go.
No one wants that. And look, here's just a couple of the behind the scenes, kind of what we're up to when we're in the planning stages out in the middle of nowhere. We'd pull over. Steve typically wouldn't want to fly much more than 2 hours. So we could get out there, we could stretch our legs, we can refuel, we can recalibrate, we can pull out the maps and talk about what's next.
And that was partly to make sure that we had quite a lot of extra fuel in the tank for the kind of photography work we wanted to do. It wasn't so that actually meant we probably ended up landing and doing more fuel drops than you might have needed if you were literally just relocating yourself across country.
Not only that, it provided us the opportunity to move around the cabin so we could reasonably frequently swap seats and give everyone a fair go.
Yeah, that was quite a crucial element, and it became like Tim said, it was a bit of a well-oiled machine by the end.
Yeah,
we're having a bit of fun with it.
But what I think was interesting was obviously the wind plays a big part in how much fuel you use. So it was also a matter of landing, checking how much fuel you had, looking at the next leg, trying to work out, where we want to focus our attentions. So it was a nice way to really get involved with that planning on a micro level.
And the last image there that I had before I pass over to someone else is just the four of us, and it was just a nice kind of environmental portrait at the hangar there at Port Pirie. And that was the last photo that we had all together, just as the storm clouds were rolling in, and we'll touch on that later.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the weather conditions that you had across the trip, because it doesn't always go to plan. So I'm sure you'll touch on that.
We had a lot of changing. We obviously had some very detailed plans of where we wanted to go, and then we really had to think on the run because it was a very big and a bit of an odd storm front coming in from the northeast, I think. So we definitely had to make adjustments.
Not only that is that I think we mentioned it earlier, but we had plans in the works for almost 2 years before we actually rubber hit the road and we took off. We had intentions of pursuing the journey in May 2021, and we commenced conversations well in advance of that. Unfortunately, at that point in time, weather got in the way of that as well. So much of our story has been kind of plans being curtailed by reasonably or very abnormal weather events, in an area that, has pretty stable weather conditions, and it has blue skies, 364 days of the year. Not only did we have our initial plans fall through, and we literally found out the night before we were expected to take off. And I think Paul was out in the wilderness up in the Tscharke, and came home to his phone and cried himself to sleep that night.
I was literally came out from a 5-day remote area trip. I was literally got home at 10 at night. I was up at 4 a.m. the next morning to catch the 6 a.m. flight and hit it, and I was already half packed. And then I just got these messages saying it's off, and I was like, "What do you mean? All booked, ready to go, like bags packed." And I was just like, "Oh!" And it was a bit rough actually, but that's part of a testament to Steve. Is it a lot of these areas that we are landing in are it'd be incredibly dangerous, if not lethal, to try and land on some of these trips when they're wet, because they're clay soils, and your wheels would just basically slam into the water, and potentially even flip the plane over. So So we did get a lot of unusual weather systems coming through at weird times. And in some ways, that's kind of what we were after in a way, because the landscape around South Australia has been really unusually colourful and vibrant and dynamic in the last sort of 6 months in particular, because of a lot of these unusual weather systems that have been coming through and, you know, flooding Lake Eyre and putting huge amounts of rain around landscape that's normally just incredibly arid. And just the vegetations just explode, and all sorts of different algae blooms just come out. And you'll see in some of our photos some of the craziest algae blooms I've ever seen in my life. And they wouldn't be there without those weather systems. So it's kind of like it kind of put us back a while. And what was it? It almost took us, how long, guys, did it take us to get back out there again? Like
another 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't it?
The plans were cancelled, and then COVID got in the way. And so we'd been speaking online for the best part of 2 years before we actually met in person.
And funny enough, like I said, we hadn't met in person before at all until we arrived at the airport. And and yet we kind of felt like, at least I did anyway, that we kind of knew quite a lot about each other from all the years of just enjoying each other's work and admiring each other from afar and chatting and talking. And so it was a very easy kind of flow on, wasn't it, guys? Like, just to...
Very natural, yeah.
It's quite an intimate, intense thing to do, you know. If you were with people who had really different values and didn't get on very well, and you're spending 20 hours in a cockpit with them, then good luck with that. You're going to be...
Also, I liked how the dynamic changed. Obviously, the first few hours, you know, you guys just met Steve. I reckon by about hour 5, it's just laughter and jokes, and felt like long lost friends. To be honest, it was a good dynamic, good vibe in the cockpit for sure.
There was only one rule in the cockpit, and that wasn't, you weren't allowed to fart. So I think the minute that we touched down, we all kind of were jumping up and down a little bit.
Yeah, and probably
get outside, take care of business, get back in, you know.
So no, it was.
Dave, you want to? I don't know if you got a few shots here. You're going to share, but
no worries. So. We've sort of seen some of these before.
Only some. Go through them one by one. They're
cool. So just good to people get to know us a bit more. So
if you go back, that was a beautiful airport hangar, and we ended up doing a lot of our filming in there because, as you can see, the light is absolutely superb.
Yeah,
and acoustics were as well. I mean, literally had like 5 hours like unaccosted in there with like you know, because normally in a working hangar you'd never get that sort of time period where there wasn't planes taking off and this and that. And so we sort of hit jackpot there. We wanted to give a little bit of contextual kind of nature to what we're doing through even through the interview process as well. And I think that was something we put a bit of thought into. And we finally figured out how to get the sound kit work.
So one thing I really thought was great, Paul really took a lot of nice portraits. Not saying I normally do a lot of. Just
very nice.
But yeah, it's just a nice way to document behind the scenes. And
well, that was standing in the middle of a very remote runway, actually, one of the more beautiful ones. And I remember we met one of the ladies we met there. She was like, what would you say, like a Parks and Wildlife or custodian? Conservation officer.
Conservation, yeah.
And there was actually another plane that had landed there, which was not, we didn't see many other planes, I'll tell you that. And they had a group in there that she was kind of doing a really big, beautiful kind of presentation around the kind of how much wild creatures and what's the word?
Had a lot of fenced off area, Paulie, to just to try and re-establish the native fauna.
Yeah, so interestingly, and I know that we touched on it earlier, but the modern legacy of the landscape is something that we wanted to document from above. And this particular property was a pastoral lease. So it was a cattle station once upon a time, or sheep station. And it had been recently purchased by a conservation or private conservation business. And they're repurposing the whole station to become a wilderness area. There's various wildlife and birds and stuff that they're repurposing the whole station to help manage and kind of, you know, increase breeding numbers and so on and so forth.
what I found quite fascinating is super remote. You wouldn't think people would be doing conservation projects, like it's so far away. But it's nice that people care enough to look after these unseen environments. It's not close to any cities or.
And I think it's very easy to underestimate the amount of an intricacy of wildlife that exists in these places. Like you just look around and you think, oh my God, there's nothing here. It's desert. It's so bare and barren, and it's actually not. And someone with kind of her sort of knowledge was really insightful in terms of just leaning into the depth and intimacy of just how many layers of different creatures live out there and rely on each other and kind of symbiotically live together in one of the more harsher environments in this part of the world.
And again, it added the depth of understanding for us as well, didn't it? Like,
yeah, like it did for me. Like it's a little bit easy. Like you don't necessarily connecting with wildlife up in the sky, which is you really don't want to do, because if you get a few birds flying in their propeller, that yeah, you might be heading to the ground really fast. So it's that could be a danger with flying actually. And like I said, the weather kind of shaped our trip to some extent as well. We actually ended up at the tail end of our trip having to make quite a discerning decision. Like we were, this was probably around here, I think, Tim, wasn't it? We were got up in the morning and it was kind of like, well, there's a huge storm system coming in from the east, which is actually really unusual because most of them come from the west. And so we could risk going out into the very, very remote areas that we were actually particularly keen to get to. All of us collectively said, even in the film, you notice we were talking about areas we wanted to get to. And that was the area that we kind of had to pull back on. And we could have risked going out there and landed, but we literally might have been stuck there for 4, 5, 6 days before we could actually come back. And so we had to make a judgment call sort of, and it took a lot of effort to get that far out, to be in a position where we could actually explore country that none of us had been to. So it wasn't like you just arrived there. It was a huge journey to get to the platform in order to reach it. But we made a judgment call, and it was the right one, to turn around and try to race the storm back. And it ended up getting pretty exciting. You'll notice that hanger shot earlier, how dark it was. There was literally lightning storms around us and rain falling out of the sky all around us and thunder. It was pretty wild. And we were Steve was literally flying between them and dodging them on the way back to get us back safely. So we kind of only just made it back, really.
So I think it's definitely a silver lining, that forced change, and we got to see the Sun of the Flinders Ranges in this epic light. I've never seen anything like it, to be honest.
Yeah, and we were all kind of like, oh, and we're not big on sort of giving every single place we went away, but you'll recognise from the shots, we did go over the Flinders Ranges, and we were all kind of a bit concerned that we were going to be going over there at like the middle of the day, and the light would be really crap, and we wouldn't really get many unique or interesting photographs. And it actually was one of the highlights of the trip, because we flew over it in the middle of a storm system, and it was so dramatic and so stunning. We were absolutely just frothing ourselves, and that's saying something when at the end of 20 hours of shooting and you're frothing yourself at something new.
We were frothing ourselves, Paul, but I'm not sure if Steve was.
I know at one stage.
Oh, Steve! Oh my God, we had 4 or 5 aircraft around us, and they were really, really quite close in altitude. And that's actually quite dangerous. And we were like, oh, Steve, go left. Oh, okay, right. Oh, can we go back? And he's just like shaking his head going, you guys have no idea what
in fact, there was one point where he just turned us off on the microphone. He's like,
it just like,
yeah, I need 20 minutes to myself here.
And we weren't quite sure what was going on because he didn't have time to like spill it out to us. And he told us afterwards, it was like, dude, like if I didn't focus then we might not have made it back. Like, because the chance of crashing inside, and we literally started seeing planes around us. We're like, oh God.
But that shows Steve's experience. Like, safety was always paramount. Like, that was always the overarching, message from Steve is, let's do this, but he makes sure it's safe. Like, and he was just a great safe pilot, and so thorough with his checks.
And when you go on that remote, you really do want someone, one, that knows the landscape, and two, that's going to take a reasonably safe route, because there's a lot of dominoes on a trip that long and that remote. Can you go back to that last photograph? So I actually wanted to choose this as the graphic for the show. And one of the reasons I wanted to, we've kind of alluded to really, like this is David as a silhouette. And to me, this project was born from his vision and already his years of experience in flying country and planes just like that, with Steve especially. And it just symbolically kind of had a beautiful kind of aesthetic and emotion to it that I think really spoke of David's vision. So I remember I was literally lying on my stomach, getting eaten by ants trying to take this photograph at sunset, but I'm glad I took it.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely very proud now looking back at what we achieved.
Very much so.
Yeah, to do something, and definitely sort of, I think we've overachieved in a way. The body of work is, I think, it's quite diverse and powerful.
Yeah, we're pushing 20,000 images all up, I think. And not that it's about volume, but it kind of is about volume because we covered so much ground and went so many places. And
so as you can see, this is the storm, overhead, just probably 10 minutes after we landed. It's pretty epic, to be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and they literally were. I mean, we were watching lightning strikes as we were coming in to the area we were going to land, and it was just like, oh, so the hair going up on the back of your neck there. So we better get to ground. And,
we're about an hour and a half in, and we're bringing this conversation to a bit of a crescendo. So I think it's about time we start sharing some of the results.
You want to?
Yeah, I'll do it in a sec. I'll show you just a quick few of my behind the scenes stuff, and then we'll jump into that because you're right, Tim. We've got about 40 odd minutes to have a crack at that. But just to widen out a little bit of story, I'll whip through them. Just share my screen. Come over here. So I'll do that. Oops, that's not what I was trying to jump to. That's our little teaser video. Jump to the far one. What do we got here? Oh yeah, is it trumpet? Very good. So we're taking turns. It's a pretty physical thing to do. We actually had to take turns. Like that is not exactly new, highly agreed. This is doing it high tech, boys. So much fun though. Here's Tim packing his goodies up. So we did a bit of time. You notice, look, if you actually break down a video and you look at some of the subtle components, there's quite a lot of thought put into some of the design of some of the backstory sort of stuff we put to the show, and some of the angles. This is my first invitation to the boss man here. Just get a sense of his character. He says, how's it going to go, mate? Oh, she'll be sweet as, mate. You gonna feel one? Yeah, no worries, mate. She'll all fit in. Because we weren't sure how much room was going to be in the plane, and we actually had to spend quite a bit of time going through our stuff and trying to figure out. We're stripping out clothes mainly, so you can see my pile of clothes just disappearing on the right, and just trying to think what's the minimum we can get away with without like dying from like fumes from each other's bodies with no changes of clothes.
I think we all just said no sacrifice on camera gear, and then we just skipped on clothes and
chucked everything else out. But there's quite a process in preparing for a trip sort of that long, and the weight in the plane is very, very significant in terms of your reach and even how it flies. So it was something we really needed to spend a bit of time with, and this is the moment we met.
Yeah.
Literally the first minute. I was like, "Well, hey boys," and I was like, "Oh shit, we got to take a photo of this before we jump in the car."
We got a hug too, which is odd for the first meeting.
Yeah, no, we were hugging each other. We never even met. It was great. And we did. I actually took the same photograph when we finished.
Yeah.
We're probably a little bit hairier. I'll go
a little bit stinkier.
Definitely a little bit stinkier. Here's like when we were driving out to where we started from, and it was my first kind of reminder of what South Australia is all about.
That's where I grew up.
That's David's country. Where is it? Over here somewhere? Or
what where your mouse is now around that?
Oh, what I guess. There you go. David's hometown. Yeah. Oh my God! I knew it was around there somewhere. What a fluke! I was just sitting my mouse. I didn't even know. Lucky last, and this is one of the characters we met too. These guys are pretty good mates, and we spent quite a lot of time with both of them. But it speaks a lot to Steve's the depth of his relationship with a lot of the characters out in country, and oh my God, some characters out there far out.
Yeah.
So that's my quick backstory stuff. If you want to, do you want to kick off, Tim? Who was going to kick off?
Yeah,
go for Tim.
Well, either or. Like I was going to go last, I think.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I guess now for the audience, stop sharing. We were just going to showcase not the best of the best or any sort of particular images. In fact, mine are completely random. But we did want to, we had a few discussions about what we wanted to share, because this is kind of the inaugural release of pretty much the whole project. And we thought to choose images that spoke to those layerings of the Indigenous and cultural and historical and modern kind of legacy to the landscape, and speak about them more from that understanding than just pure artistic beauty. Although you'll find a bit of both, especially with this one.
This one. Well, the interesting story about this one here was that this was, in fact, the first image that I captured on the entire journey. If we captured collectively 20,000 images, much of that would have been behind the scenes, and I know that I captured around 6,000 images of purely aerial landscape, and this would have been within the first handful. So we quite literally had taken off, and we were immediately above some incredible country. The thing that really appeals to me about this image is just kind of, in fact, I titled this Intricate. There's some really fine detail, and then there's kind of this big, broad brushstroke that comes down from the top center of the image. You know, not all aerial imagery is all about high contrast, funky colors, super abstract. And, you know, this one is a color palette that is quite muted and olive, but it's all about that pattern and the fine details of those little tributaries that are coming off that creek.
Quite rewarding, the subtlety, and you can really explore the frame. There's so much going on in different levels of detail. You're right, it's beautiful.
Moving along, the second image. So I must say that we each selected 10 images or thereabouts to showcase tonight. And I guess the remit that we gave each other was, let's give ourselves as much diversity in terms of subject as possible. And this one to me talks to just how arid and sparse a lot of the north, and this was taken in the northeast of the state, how remote and isolated and vast and sparse that country is. You know, the fact that from a geological perspective, that these are weathered mountains that have been standing the test of time for millennia, and the stories that they could tell is just remarkable. Similarly, this image here was captured in the Channel Country, and the Channel Country is the country, or the broad definition of the country that feeds into Lake Eyre. Lake Eyre is a terminal lake, meaning that it's a lake that rivers terminate into, and it doesn't terminate into the sea. And the rivers that feed into Lake Eyre are ephemeral. Obviously, they only flow when it's really collected a bunch of rain in the basin. And this particular part of the Lake Eyre basin was dry. The thing that really I find incredibly fascinating is just the relationship that the Indigenous Australians have with country. And I use the definition of country as the Indigenous definition, which isn't just necessarily landscape, but the living landscape that encapsulates, you know, culture, that encapsulates things like the creation stories. And the thing that stands out about this image in particular is that some of the Indigenous artists of the Central Desert have some striking similarities in terms of the patterns of this image. That kind of fractal, kind of shattered glass effect. There's one artist in particular that has ties to the Central Desert country that has dot paintings that are eerily familiar with this image. And of course, when it floods, it's not red and white, but she's green. And when we flew over it, it was, this particular area was very dry. This image here, and of course, a lot of the landscape that we fly over is parallel sand dunes. The sand dunes run north to south because the prevailing wind blows west to east. And, you know, these sand dunes are kilometres long, and much of the country is just these vast vegetated sand dunes. They're not quite like the sand dunes that David Thompson presented to you guys last week. They're these ancient parallel sand dunes, and the thing that stands out to this image is that we've got the rural road that kind of intersects on an absolute perpendicular. So there's a real kind of graphic element to this image. Similarly, there's a graphic element to this image, and this image, whereas the last image was taken of an area, an extremely dry area, I shouldn't say in drought because it's not technically in drought, but a very arid area. This area is a part of the Channel Country that had experienced some pretty significant rainfalls. And this is actually an image that's taken over a cattle station. There's a road that cuts the image perpendicular straight down the middle. And of course, that's intersected by some floodwaters. And then the interesting thing of this image is if you focus in kind of to the lower center, there's a number of head of cattle. So there's a herd of cattle there, just to give that kind of the image on first glance may be extremely abstract, but the longer that you sit on this image, the more apparent what it actually is, it becomes. And yeah, this is broadacre pastoral country.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me, Tim, when we're out there is you think you're in the middle of nowhere, but you see so many roads, don't you? Like there's so many tracks and roads, and it sort of speaks to the relationship that man has to the country. Like there's not many places which are untouched.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's scars from roads haven't been used for years.
Yeah, and this is what man has to do to feed himself, really. We have to. I think there was a state of the land report that was issued by the government, by one of the scientific departments of the government recently, and I think 70% of Australia is pastoral, which is an incredibly high number. This one, I mentioned the values of art before. This one for me is extremely aesthetic. The reason why I chose to show this one tonight was the moment I captured this image is a moment that I thought of my daughter Sophie. She's 4 years old. I titled this image Dreamland, and her favorite colors are pink and purple. And I could just see this being part of her dreams, with unicorns floating across the across the landscape. To me, that's really quite meaningful because I look at this image and I think of her.
Nice.
There we go. This is kind of where the desert meets a salt lake. And Paul mentioned it earlier, but we were witness to some of the most incredible algal bloom events that I certainly have ever seen.
Oh yeah.
And over this particular flight, I think all of our tongues were wagging and our chins had hit the floor. We were just absolutely gobsmacked in terms of the colours that we saw, in terms of the textures and the patterns that were created by the drying algal bloom on the edge of the salt lake. And then there were these really interesting patterns, where the spring waters were kind of leaking or leaching into the lake, and it was extremely pink, and those colours, as you saw in the video, are reasonably, they are true to life.
Yeah.
This is just one of those ephemeral salt lakes that just kind of fills from time to time when there's boom and bust, as they say in the outback. One of the key elements to a lot of my images is I like to try and find leading lines coming in from the corners, and you can see one of the leading lines comes in from a diagonal on the bottom left there, and then it just kind of creates a journey for the eye to meander around the scene.
With this particular image, I remember we got back to one of the outback pubs, and we were trying to work out what it was called, and like some of these places weren't even the map, were they? Like, struggled to find if they've been named. And that was one of the beauties of this trip, was it was not lake area as such or the big ticket items. It was these unknown places.
Absolutely. You know,
Special.
there was a well-worn map on the wall of Mare Pub where we stayed one of the nights, and I spent 5 minutes trying to find this place, and in hindsight, I'm almost glad that I didn't, because that mystery stays with me, and that's part of the mystery that we hope to convey in our imagery. Moving on to some of the more man-made and human influenced landscapes that we flew over, and this one in particular. The reason why I put this in the sequence in terms of the curation of the images that I chose is that all the preceding images were more organic and natural, whereas this one, the juxtaposition of the organic and natural with the man-made is abundantly clear. It's so clear that there's the thing that jumps out to you in this image is that to the right of the frame, you've got the organic natural component, which is just what were once upon a time creeks that went out to the sea. And then on the left of the frame, it's that heavy hand of man that, there is I think Carolyn Cheng on your show was talking about, was it the divine or one of those sayings that, man has a propensity to kind of impose himself on the landscape. And that's certainly what I feel in this image. This one here was actually a decommissioned coal mine that we flew over. And the fact of the matter is that this miner has been out of operation for a number of years and still hasn't been made good from the miner that, exploited the resources of that mine. And that was something that I found quite confronting, is that we've still got these open cut mines in a day and age where I expect miners to do the right thing and to make goods and remediate some of their mines. We've got a couple of mines that are sitting out there that are just really kind of collecting dust. I found that quite disappointing. And as such, having quite a monotone color palette with the greys and the whites that kind of lead the eye into the frame where you've got the greens and the golds, I think really works powerfully with this image. And then I think this is lastly, this image is one of my favorites. The real kind of geometric power of this image, the fact that I've intersected corner to corner a very strong, striking line that on one side kind of almost feels like there's these scratch marks, and then above that is what you probably consider a little bit more organic. So there is no contrast of color per se, but there's certainly contrast of texture, and that's certainly what appeals to me of this image.
Yeah, and that's what I found quite striking with this particular location was they're like separate images, aren't they? Like they're just dissected with these roads or dams, and that's quite powerful having things side by side, and just the contrasting nature of it.
So that's me and my 10 images. I'm sure it's someone else's turn to kind of share the limelight.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, I'll tee something up, guys. One sec. All right, so I'll take off where Tim finished. So this is obviously same location and just from a different angle, Tim. And the idea behind this one was having the contrasting almost as you did, but I really wanted to keep that diagonal line on the third and just play around with the geometric form, the graphic nature of the image. So again, one of these pink salt lakes where sort of you get lost for words when you fly over this country in this condition. what appealed to me with this particular image was that it's like almost like a pink ribbon floating on the breeze, like it's that organic shapes, the curves, and the subtle the subtle tonal variations through this banding and the layers. So
yeah, there's a beautiful rhythm to this image. That main curve, that main ribbon, gives it a really nice pace for your eye to kind of be drawn into the frame and then kind of meander around the frame. It's such a striking image.
Yeah, because that's where the your artistic vision comes in. So, obviously the lake was full of colour, but it's trying to come up with compositions which sort of hold the viewer's attention, and you're looking for those features.
That's something I think that it's one of the great challenges of aerial photography is compositions. So your compositions change literally every single second. So you blink and your composition is gone. And there's kind of no other form of landscape photography that's like that, arguably, in terms of static objects anyway. So you kind of almost have to see where that gap is, or get a sense of intuitively which way the plane's moving, to as much as you can kind of pre-visualize a little bit. But it's when you get to a stage like this, it's a very intuitive, spontaneous process where you're almost reacting to what's in front of you.
And I think a lot of Paul is subconscious as well. Like it's you've sort of trained your eye to see compositions, and it becomes automatic in a way. So
yeah, beautiful color palette. I mean, this is just like, as soon as that went around, it just like hit me in the face. It was like whoosh.
Yeah, obviously this was we all talked about a fair bit.
Brutal,
I'd previously shot, with the help of Steve, because it is out the way and it's not on the way to anywhere that you would normally go. Obviously it's a grotesque beauty. It's just the sheer scale of these tailing dams blow me away. Like you see the turnaround at the end of big trucks drive up these roads and turn around. So these things are kilometres across.
We had to fly up like thousands of feet high in order to even be able to photograph this place. It was so
4,000 to 5,000 feet up just to try and fit these things in. So I'm always really conflicted when I look at these images. Like, yeah.
I mean,
like
when you see it from
or something, isn't it?
Well, it kind of is in a way. I mean, it grabs you from afar. It's kind of like even when you're just going out to shoot really amazing natural landscapes, you'll often come across these things accidentally, and that's kind of how my journey began. Speaking on my behalf, David, and there was this tug and pull that still continues to this day, where aesthetically and artistically you're really drawn to them because they're really striking and abstract and kind of wild and like nothing you've ever sort of seen or could create yourself. And so you can't help but sort of be drawn to them. But when you reach under it, the kind of meaningfulness around what am I sort of sharing here? What is this saying about, human's relationship with the earth? What is it saying about how we run the country? And what are we leaving behind? What's our modern legacy and that we're creating in Australia? And this is part of that story. So we want to let our art do the talking like this, where, there's no words. We're not going to name where anything is. There's no anything. It's just letting it speak for itself. But it does speak loudly. And I think it's important that we bring these into collective light and collective conversation to just keep really present to the choices we're making as a society.
Yeah, I read an essay recently about, this is the price we pay for the things, we have in modern society. Like, but we're so far removed. We all drive cars. We all have computers. We all benefit from technology. But this is and most of the time, it's like the faceless reality of it. We're so far disconnected from this stuff's necessary to have what we have every day, but because we don't see it, it doesn't come to your mind. So it's nice to show it and just make people contemplate. This is the price we pay for modern convenience in a way.
Yeah, there's a deep metaphor here for me. The shape of the roadway there is in the shape of a Y, And every time I see this image, Dave, I ask myself the question, why? Why do we exploit our resources so heavily? Why are we so dependent on the exploitation of those resources? Yeah, it's a really quite powerful image, not only graphically, but on a deep metaphorical basis.
Yeah, well said, Tim.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, like for that realism aspect as well. Like, we're a bit hypocritical if we're sitting at home going on about this and we're using cameras and computers and cars and phones that are all being drawn from the kind of resources, some of which we're even looking at right now. So it's kind of, we're making choices every day. We have one of the greatest lifestyles of any country on the planet. And yet we're, as a nation, one of the poorest to engage in environmental kind of conversations and commitments in the whole world, and at least in the Western world anyway. It's kind of like that is saying something, and it is worth having conversations about. So
a bit of a contrast. I included this image. I just like the subtle palette, the simplicity of it. Obviously the cloud reflections soften the image. But I guess this speaks of the variety of landscape we saw, and the variety we see in South Australia. It's why it's such an interesting place to fly over.
Beautifully subtle, David, like so gorgeously subtle.
Oh, thanks, mate.
And I like the way that ties in the land and the sky in a very thoughtful sort of way. This one of my favorites.
Another Salt Lake, and we had some really nice mid-morning light, and the light really reflected in at the right angle. It really illuminated must be a little bit of surface water. Yeah.
It's very three-dimensional, doesn't it?
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's almost an optical illusion there.
Yeah, it's almost like a solarization of a kind, or
almost infrared. It kind of reminds me of some of Luke's infrared work.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites of yours, David, to be honest, from what I've seen so far. And we haven't seen all of each other's work. We've kind of, that's going to be a big process from now on. Like when we move forward with the project in terms of how we coalesce and curate the work. And that's, we don't mind if that takes a while. It's a huge body of work and we want to do it well. And one of the things Tim suggested tonight actually is that part of that process was to choose images from each other's body of work that we were particularly drawn to and present them and speak to them ourselves. But we've gone back to this original format. But my point is, like, it is important that we start engaging with each other's work and reaching behind the narratives and the meaning and the symbolism and the metaphor and the conversations of what we want to present and create a very broad brush that comprehensively covers all those different aspects of narrative that we want to express. So even a process like tonight's really valuable in that regard.
Yeah, I think it is. It's nice to talk about it. So this is Channel Country. And again, I talked about the light reflecting off the water surface, and occasionally you're just in the right position to get that, that glow off the water. So this is, the reason I showed this, I wanted to show it's almost a depth of tapestry of the image where you've got the water course, but you have these almost like spider webs, it looks like. And other thing, we were really lucky on a few occasions, we had this nice dappled light, which gives almost a third dimension to it. So you've got areas of light cloud and light shining through and illuminating different sections of the scene. So it's almost created a vignette, like a natural vignette. So, again, a similar scene to the last one, but I think it was further north. So I captured some of this country about 3 years ago on a trip with Steve. I sort of looked at the Google Earth and maps and I sort of got pretty excited about these little tributaries. Last time we were up there, it was totally dry. There's no green at all. So this time we had a bit more water around, which added another dimension again, I think. So,
Images like this make me really sad that Instagram's the primary photo sharing platform, because images like this need to be seen large, and there's such fine, intricate detail and texture in images like this that just need to be seen larger to be fully appreciated. This one for me is, you know, that kind of beautiful rhythmic line that cuts through the center of the image, and then it kind of leads you straight in, and then the intrigue and mystery of what else is there in the frame to find. It's just beautiful.
Thanks, mate.
Well, I think it also speaks to that, you know, boom bust kind of cycle, the almost like parchment like feeling to the drier kind of areas of landscape that are out in the open, relative to the, you know, fingers of life that are clinging on around, you know, what little waterways are coming through, and then sometimes this might open out and be an entire floodplain. It's an incredible cycle, and it's written into the landscape, and it's quite difficult to relate to on a ground level, and it really, really comes to life from this perspective.
Yeah, you're right. The history, you can almost see back in time to the drier patches where you can see where the water flowed. You know, might have been 3, 4, 5 years before. So you got that. You're right. That it's that boom and bust, and it's. I guess this is why I love that ancient landscape. It tells a story, and there's scars almost on the landscape from previous weather events. So. You put it really nicely before, Tim, I think it was you, Tim, talked about the Indigenous art from Central Australia. And one thing that struck me the first time I travelled up north was how well they portrayed it there's no hills, like you said, there's no hills, there's no vantage points to look down the landscape in this country we flew over. But it definitely reminds me of that style of artwork. It's the ochre colours, the almost like Dreamtime stories. Like I know this is a road made by modern man, but it's almost like snake marks and different lines. So just to me, it's really Australian. Like it speaks of Australian artwork to me. So I've got a few images here, which I guess as a child, I really remember reading the Rainbow Serpent book. I was really fascinated by the Dreamtime stories that we sort of grew up listening to. And this is some of the features you'll find in the outback. Look, to me, I see some sort of octopus or some sort of desert salt lake monster. And I guess a lot of my style is zooming up. I think I use the 70 to 200, so I really zoomed up on this image, opposed to showing the whole landscape, but just showing interesting features. I've got another one here, which, you know, again, sort of reminds me of a Dreamtime story of a bird sort of flying over the lake. Or just, like I said, you don't always see these things when you're looking through your viewfinder, but when you open the images up on your computer, you see more detail and see things you didn't see on a day. This is one of my favourites from the trip. This is on the edge of the salt lake that led into that really brown, dirty sort of desert. And to me, I'm seeing spirits, you know, trying to escape or.
Big time. Do you ever see Adam Williams' photograph from the Kaditunda Lake book? In the end, that I just saw incredible echoes of that. It was called Ascension, and it just looked like all the souls being called to heaven, and this is very different and in some ways more gritty and it has a stronger kind of feel. But both of them gives me goosebumps. You know?
I was really captivated with Adam's photograph. I remember seeing that, and I was really drawn to the image. And I was
super powerful.
The I mentioned it in the film, but there is a certain spirit to the country, and you know, here is a spirit in the form of a salt lake, and you know, whether you kind of almost looks like Casper the Ghost or something, but there's a very spiritual, figure in this, and I just find it so fascinating. There's a reason why I chose this image as the hero image on our website that we'll talk to at the conclusion.
Like a scream or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's just such a powerful image.
Yeah, and it has a lot of dynamism and movement. It's like you can almost like a sound as well. You can almost hear the scream.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the way some of these abstract images can conjure up emotions, and you don't always know why, or it takes a while for you to process what you think about them. So, which adds another layer to the imagery.
Definitely.
So was the ground actually wet and muddy in a lot of the places?
There was surface water on this lake. I think earlier on I showed the image, the mono image with the light reflecting off. It's on the same lake, so there was some surface water which created, obviously very, very shallow, which created a different depth, I guess, to the salt lake. Some reflection and different.
We covered so much territory, Luke, that some lakes had water, some lakes didn't. Lake Aircuddy Thunder was pretty dry. In fact, it was the driest I've seen it. And then, the story of our trip was that we were followed home by storms and she filled the next day. So
yeah, this looks like it here. Yeah. Wow.
I couldn't wipe the smile from my face. Like I said to the guys, we've got a couple of choices to make when we fly.
We're like, Dave's got to answer his pants. Look at him go. He was jumping up.
I'd flown over 3 times before, and every time you fly middle of the day or mid-morning, you get a lot of haze around the Flinders Ranges, and it makes it really hard to get a really good image. But I've never seen, this sort of weather event. Rarely see it from the ground, but to fly through it, I don't think it will happen again in my lifetime, to be honest.
I mean, it's not a smart move to be flying around in those sort of conditions. So you'd have to have a pretty game pilot for starters, or a very foolish one.
Well, I thought about you wouldn't set off in it unless you had to. Like we looked at the weather maps quite a lot, and Steve studied them and knew we had time to get home before the worst of it came through. So we were sort of on the edge, I guess, which is where all the excitement happens, isn't it? On the edge of storms.
On the edge, right.
Yeah.
I did start getting pretty edgy when I started seeing lightning flashing around us. I was like, oh, okay, we're in a metal object in the sky.
I was too excited to get scared, to be honest. Like I'm just in that zone where you just, to coin your phrase, just frothing, mate. I just love it.
Frothing, yeah.
It was amazing.
Frothing, mate.
And the other thing was like the dappled light, like it could, lots of times in these conditions, it'd just be overcast and you wouldn't see the detail in the landscape. But to have these patches of dappled light shining through, and especially we had it off the escarpment, which just adds so much to the image.
A lot of really good feedback on YouTube from this image too. A lot of people really love it. So, yeah,
much appreciated.
And I love the mirroring of the cloud and the range in the foreground with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, those
together. Yeah.
Well spotted. And this is so we took it in turns. Actually, I remember Paulie was in the back.
Oh, I was in the
wrong side. We could just sense it. He's just missing out. And then and Steve was such a good man. He knows he doesn't want anyone to miss out. He's such a thoughtful guy. And so quite often he just knows, no, I'm going to go up here around, boys, and you've had enough. It's time for Paul to have a shoot. And I think
he was the one who would think of it sometimes, because David would have done that for 4 hours and not worried about it. He was so excited. Yeah, and fair enough. He knew, like, more than us, probably, just how this is probably a once in a lifetime experience.
Oh, yeah. So,
and that's Wilpena Pound.
It is.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So they get rain events up there, but like I said, it's not that common, to be honest.
And particularly being in the air around it as well.
Did much come down after you'd gone in terms of the rainfall?
Oh, this was just the start of it.
Yeah, sit in for a few days.
Flying through it the whole way back. If that's what you mean in terms of the day, and then it carried on after. So we flew over Lake Eyre that I think the day before or the day before that, and it was almost pure white. It was one of the whitest I'd ever seen. And I saw a photograph from my friend Elodie Penrose, who's one of the pilots there, and half of the lake had gone completely pink overnight. All this crazy color through it, and it's kind of like you just don't know what you're getting. We got areas like this that we never would have got because of the weather. So
yeah,
so it's on a trip that big and that vast, you can't sit there and wait for 4 days for the right conditions. You kind of just got to keep moving through and get what you get once you've hit the go button to some extent.
So yeah, almost through it. So this is a bit further south, sort of flying over the southern Flinders Ranges, and again the dappled light was just
glorious,
really spectacular, heavenly light, really. And we sort of, I knew of this wind farm. I've driven past it quite a few times, and we talked about it, and I wanted to shoot it. And we talked last night actually about the power of this image. It's the fact that we've seen a lot of we saw the coal fields earlier this morning, to be honest, before we shot this. So we saw like the past of power generation, and then some people might not know overseas, but South Australia is really at the forefront of renewable energy in Australia. So I think last year, the stat was between 60 and 70% of our power production was renewable, which I'm really proud of. So this is Upper Spencer Gulf. So this wind farm was built because it's close to high voltage transmission lines. So there was a coal-fired power station not far from here, which has been decommissioned, which is quite controversial at the time. And there's a big solar farm nearby and a lot of windmills. So it's nice to see the future. Like we're starting, we can do a lot more, but it's heartening to see the direction this state's heading in. But I also like this image because you've got the stormy clouds behind it, and hopefully it's a metaphor that, there is a storm raging with, climate, but some people trying to do the right thing for the future. So that's why I included this image. I think that's the last of mine, guys. So I'll hand over to you.
If you don't mind, Loki, we've hit a normal sort of time frame, but I'd certainly love to.
I think our viewers can decide if they want to stay and watch, or they can catch up later as well. It's always an option. So
and I appreciate that, Loki. Thank you.
No, that's okay.
There we go. I've got to find the. God, I lost my screen for. Where are we? Somebody else talk for a bit. I'm trying to find my. I've lost the Zoom screen so I can share. I'm like, where the hell did it go? I'm looking everywhere. I was just getting some photos ready, and it's just disappeared.
So I don't know if it's jumping the gun, but we've had a few questions. One of them's so when's the exhibition? There's a lot of comments around, a lot of wow comments and enjoying the images on the YouTube comments. So thanks so much for so many great comments on this chat. I think it might be one of the most commented or chatted videos we've done. So thanks for all the engagement. And a lot of people enjoying the work, guys. So very well done.
Much appreciated. So, do you want to talk to that, Tim, or we're sort of just in discussions, really, like, and we want to do it justice, Lou. So, still a bit of a path to go down, but we definitely would like to see it
to do something like that.
It's a big project, and we want to do it well. We have spent quite a lot of time over the last 2 years, even before we started, getting getting really under the skin about what we wanted to create and where we want to go with it. So I'll let you go on and talk about that. Look,
I was also thinking, is it, are you content with where you're at with it, or would there be potentially follow-up trips before you went down that path too? There's always the need for more, or is it something where you're sort of happy to work with what you've got?
There's not a need for more, but there's always a desire.
Yeah.
A project like this could take a lifetime. But the fact of the matter is we have a complete portfolio.
Fantastic.
We're very happy with the images that we have captured. And if we talk about the purpose of the project, then I think we've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And yes, it's something I'd be very proud to exhibit.
And that was a real testament to the design and the 2 years of planning that went into it. Like, it would have been quite easy to come back going, oh, we didn't get there, we didn't do this, or there's more or there's less. But we'd spent so much time thinking about it and planning it and being really meticulous about where we wanted to go, and giving us the breathing room and the time to not rush it and wait till the conditions were right and really nail it at the right time. I mean, you still throw on the dice every time you get up in the air, especially on a trip that long. You really don't know what you're going to come across in a longer time period in particular. And we did get the one pretty decent false start, which was about as false start as you can get the night before you're leaving, with plane tickets already booked and bags packed. Like, it was that final line.
But it sounds like it was worth. It might sound bad, but then if you actually did go and do it, and you come away with nothing, then that's probably even worse. So
yeah,
how are you going with finding those?
Yeah,
shots?
ready to roll, man.
Awesome.
Managed to figure out the techo world. So I've got a few more, so I'll go through a little bit more quickly. Again, like, that was a real testament to the start of the trip. I just sort of going back right from the beginning, like meeting Steve the first time the night before, poring over the maps, and I've literally got the entire set of original maps like right here in my hand that Steve even gifted me, actually. Because he's so enamored by what we were doing, and he wanted to give us the time and space to really look under the hood.
So I'm curious, Paul, is there a reason why you burned out my face in that image?
that was God, mate. Look upstairs. You're like the
prettiest angel. I've looked for years.
Like the angel. And this was the first night we arrived. I actually spent all this time outside while the other guys were talking to Steve, just enamored by this country. I'm in South Australia, this big sky country. It's so different from Tasmania. It's so open and expansive and huge, and everything about it was just kind of speaking to me with that first kind of night sky on the start of the trip. And
it was good. We're talking to Steve, and like, Paul's just wandered off. We'll be gone for half a minute, just get a sunset shot, and then like he's off in the distance. Like, he's like, we're looking around and can't even see him. It's that far away, just wandering around. We'll come back when he's ready. He's right.
I don't even
You've
say
had
anything.
The Paul experience now. That's not.
You've had the Uncle Paul experience, mate. Like, just here we're right. I'll come back eventually.
It's normally just when he gets hungry, when you think you need to send out a search party and then wait another 5-10 minutes. And
there's been a few search parties set out of my time.
The same can be said about you sometimes, Luke.
Oh, well, it's probably true.
There you go. And again, I just wanted to reiterate just how much of this trip just rested on this incredible man. His generosity, his friendship, his open-mindedness, his incredible patience, and his willingness to grow and learn through our eyes as well, and seeing his own country in a different way is absolutely paramount. So I'll be praising this man till the end of my days.
Agreed.
And that one field was just, I don't know, it just summed up so many things for me about what I was hoping to experience out in this country. And it was just, and we thought, this is lunch, boys. So out we go. And it was just, it's just such a delight. And I think there is something about being on the ground that helps you arrive somewhere, quite literally as well as figuratively. It's an important thing to do as well. And I like the fact that we had a trip long enough, we had space to do that as well. Bang, like that's, I just see that and it's kind of freaking beautiful, but it's a terrible beauty, and I do think this one is beautiful. It has a softer aesthetic than maybe the other one, and there's different ways you can crop or compose an image that speak to things a little bit differently, but it really pulls you in, and the color palette's really, obviously quite extreme and quite diverse and pretty close to form, to be honest. Like that place just about poked in the eye, and that was from like 20 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away. It was just like, oh my god. You can just see it coming up on it.
I think they're so powerful because every leading line's pulling you in, isn't it? Like it's from every direction. It's all pulling you to the center.
Yeah, it's a bit like Lake Eyre, you know, everything flows into the low base of Lake Eyre. It's the lowest point of the country. It just there's that coalescing in the center, and there's almost like this pushing in from around the sides and almost like crowding around and this manifestation in a way, and this central kind of hub point of where it's all pointing towards. Yeah, I appreciate that. Kind of the energetics of that, I think. Like little leaf patterns sort of down the bottom here. This almost looks like an ancient kind of, I don't know, can you guys see my cursor?
Yep.
Yeah. Like it just looks like an old, what do you call it? Fossil of a leaf of some kind.
There was a question on YouTube earlier about what minerals create these colors. And I'm pretty sure in this instance, it was copper.
Yeah. I think the yellow's sulfur.
Yeah.
I think for people who don't know, a lot of the stuff's what's left behind from the extraction process and the elements which, I guess, to put it bluntly, don't make money. There's, you know, it's industrial waste from the mining process. So.
And I think green's normally copper. And
green's oxidized copper.
Cobalt as well.
Yeah, I think this particular mine has quite a complex kind of understory with quite a few different minerals involved in it. And
it does, yeah. They produce gold, uranium, copper, all sorts of stuff.
Is it like a matter of the colors are also different if the ground's wet, or you know you just happen to be there at a time where they were really vibrant?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, Tim's been there a few times, and actually, so has David. So, you know, you guys can speak to how much this changes.
Yeah. It was completely different. Actually, I was, to 3 or 4 years ago. I was surprised how much it changed. To be honest. Yeah.
And Tim, is that your experience?
I had similar colors, but they were all in various different patterns, and so it certainly changes, and it's a very dynamic landscape, if you can call it that. And yeah, looking at Dave's images from a number of years ago, it was almost blood red, not that kind of deep burgundy. But in this instance, I think that burgundy really sits well with that kind of lime green.
Yeah, last time I shot it, the center, instead of being the aqua color, was black. It was almost like staring to the abyss.
Yeah, it does make it. I think it needs that to really set the piece off. I'll keep moving because I've got a few more images.
Yes.
So yeah, to me that has that spiritual kind of quality of beings or creatures or spirits kind of in the landscape, and I enjoy the flow, the subtlety of the color palette, and I kind of accentuated and focused in on these features through that square kind of crop.
Yeah, nice.
And when we speak as metaphor and symbolism, this one was it just hit me. In fact, you know what? I actually didn't see this while I was shooting it. And when I was going through my photos, I was just like, oh my Lord, it looks like a fetus to me.
Yeah, it's an embryo, definitely.
Being an embryo, and it's just like, you know, being nurtured and held in this landscape, and it's slowly growing, and it could be a spirit of some kind, but it's, oh my God, it gives me goosebumps. It's really, really sort of powerful find, you know, and even the coloration of the landscape around it and that kind of flowing kind of patterning of some of these features up here just kind of accentuates some of the shaping and the energetics of it. It gives it a bit of dynamism where it otherwise would be really static.
It's really, it casts your mind, you know, to me it's like some sort of Egyptian sort of pharaoh, you know, elongated head almost. Like it's not quite humanly, but it's got that embryo look. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of like that it has a less human aspect to it. To me, that adds to the mystery and intrigue of it.
Yeah.
That it could be a being beyond a regular kind of conscious comprehension.
A cone head.
Thanks.
That's a good movie, Luke. Don't knock it.
Luke, he's just named the print. Thanks, mate.
Old pop culture. Nice.
Hey, what I like about this is it's a static object, but it looks like it's moving and it's pushing forward through wind or weather or rain. And in a way, it speaks to the shaping forces of the environment around it. Because wind and rain are a big shaping force, particularly on these kind of open salt flat structures. And you can see sort of elements of life just clinging to the more solid and consistent aspects of the environment. And yet these are a lot more dynamic and fluid and change with the rainfall. So
I love the three-dimensionality that the gradients cause as well, and it's a lovely
it lifts out of the page a little bit, and as you well know, look here, like shooting really flat, fairly featureless environments like salt lakes, it's quite a challenge to get dimensional qualities coming through in the image, and I think that's sort of lifting out of the page quite beautifully.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, it's like, what do you say? It's just, again, you know, there's these metaphorical little creatures or faces or people or you know, symbolic kind of representations of these talking, moving kind of beings sort of moving through this landscape.
Yeah, and them evolving and growing, you know, like a family of these.
Well, the repetition in nature is almost, you know, it's so similar. And just how it's formed identically almost.
Yeah, they're all on a journey together. You know, it's a static image, but it speaks of travel and movement, which is another aspect that I quite appreciate it, particularly by, you know, that alliteration in the back. You know, like the back end of a comet or you know, it just speaks a lot of travel and
ancient
flow.
Beautiful color palette there too.
Yeah, quite striking. Yeah, really drawn to this one. I think it's almost like dripping paint coming down the top of a page, and yet, you know, there's an element of actually a waterway running through there, and it's sort of has that gleaming, silvery, almost semi-metallic oil painting kind of feel about it. That it's just kind of dripping down the screen.
It's so it doesn't look like a landscape. It looks, like you said, like an abstract painting. Or
yeah, like I mean, you say that with words, but I think this really, it does really encapsulate that. It has a very oil-like thickness to it. You know, there's a viscosity to this image that is kind of hard to explain any other way than being in a kind of paint form, which I really appreciate. And
print, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to putting this into print, I reckon. A little bit extra texture and that diagonal flow just really ties it together. And maybe metallic too, Lukey. That could be.
Oh yes, of course. That'd be a much better choice.
Well, both would work. They just have a different. They just accentuate different.
You can
things.
see that luster already, though, and just even in the image.
Yeah, there's a sheen on the right there. You probably want to lean into a little bit. That would probably get a bit sucked up by the William Turner, but the William Turner would come alive, I think, with that top left sort of section. Like it's kind of got the two main areas of the image have, you know, slightly different aesthetics to them. But it's definitely pretty mysterious. I think very simple, but a sense of intersection and movement. It's almost like a kiss of these two creatures that are coming in here, or, you know, like a really soft sort of meeting of forms. And again, you know, it's kind of beautiful to get those diagonal sense of flow and those little alliterations that come through, very, very subtle sort of elements, but I almost feel like it's twisting around on itself. You know, there's a sense of diagonal, almost like curving movement coming up through that I feel to it. And it has these different triangulated kind of positions. It's an unusual composition, and it's not necessarily, you know, 100% balanced, but I don't mind that.
Almost looks like underwater to me, like a jellyfish and a reef or something there.
Yeah, and obviously that range of color palette and the rich texture in here would be beautiful. This might be a good Platine one, Lucky. Through this sort of area in particular, really pop with that
color come through.
It's like almost like a serpent mane, like a water dragon or something. Just moving through the water. This little figures and just the most beautiful blues. Like that was one of my favorite features I think we'd come across. I think we were fairly far away. I think I was shooting about 100 mil to even catch this.
It's so soft in the back there too. It's almost like it's not even land. You know, it almost looks like it's a. You know,
well, it's kind of, it does have there was watery qualities coming through it, and this image didn't exist, I think, to my eye when we went closer to it, but further away, the way the light was reflecting completely changed and brought out different colors and qualities, and that often happens with really shallow water features. The way they refract light changes within seconds of the way you move around it and relative to the angles of light that are around at the time. And I think side by side, I didn't see any of that color in it at all. And we moved away and I was literally shooting backwards towards it. This might have been one of those ones where I even shot through a window. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I actually shot this feature from the opposite angle, Paul, and it's almost monochromatic.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. I think I've got another one of that.
Yeah.
An area of that same place that speaks to that sort of further on. Again, that sort of projection, and that almost like tiny steps of physical layering here that speaks to layer and layer and layer and layer, just built up over time. And there's a certain kind of intensity and strength to this, which is a little bit more profound than some of the more softer aesthetics that we have in other places. There's a bit of a kind of fierce proudness about this aspect of the landscape. I think they really spoke to me, and I think compositionally, I really like this being this kind of projective kind of position where it's really almost pushing out of the frame, and it's looking forward out to what's beyond. And
There was a question too, Paul, just about the previous image about it looking rotated 180 degrees as well. Have you played with different,
I don't know if I played with this particular one. It will be actually. Will let us do it? There we go. Ooh. And I think I often do that. In fact, it was Tony Hewitt that I don't know about a decade ago said, because we do really similar kind of abstract work, and he just said, just flip everything for 360 degrees and you'll get a different sense of where the visual weight and kind of what, because to me this has a softness and it's okay to have that amount of negative space in this image, and back here it's kind of and maybe upside down it doesn't have the same relationship. It doesn't. It
just felt right when you had it.
It doesn't fit very easily with me at all. In fact, it feels a bit wrong, and well, that wrong's a strong word, but you know what I mean. Like the aesthetic is completely different.
I'll play around with flipping. Sometimes when you get used to an image the way it is, your brain tells you it's wrong because you're so used to seeing it one way.
Yeah, I think that's important to break that habit early. And so I often do that very early on when I'm first engaging with editing an image.
Okay.
And it is a really good habit to get into, I think, particularly with the really super abstract work that we tend to be drawn to.
Thanks for doing that, Paul. That was great.
Oh, no, I apprate that.
Did you were going to say something too, David? Did I interrupt you, or you?
No, it was more about like I said, getting used to. Oh, before I was going to say the previous image, the white banding around the headland almost looks like icing from a cake, or it's got a beautiful creamy texture. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's got a lot of physicality to it, and a lot of this it's not that common. Like a lot of the transitions were a lot softer and more gentle, where these kind of features are built up, and this is kind of a fierce, proud, and pointed kind of version. You know, it speaks a lot of the kind of forces involved around. It's almost like a wrapping around and encapsulating or pushing into a bubble. You know, it's trying to pierce into a membrane of some kind of a cell.
You can see it folding up. Yeah.
This actually could be quite strong. It's just as a square, actually, when I'm looking at it now. Because this, to me, I'm not so enamored by this part of the image. It's more the strength of it is over here. I might actually...
Can you press R and indulge us?
Why not?
No.
I just need to change it to square.
So
I tend to use... Yeah, there we go. It's just simpler and more graphic.
Yeah.
You get that line running into the bottom left corner there.
Yeah, I think it just removes. I felt like the bottom left area was a bit of a distraction. Really, it wasn't actually adding to an image.
That definitely works. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a different image, but it doesn't have the length that really accentuates that pointed flow. But it strengthens this part of the image a lot more and brings that upward flow a lot more present into it. And
more apparent.
Yeah, it's a different image, and it's really simple. Cropping is such a powerful tool, and the narrative in an image and the visual flow that you do or don't have as a result, it really is.
I do feel a little envious in a way the creative freedom you do have with aerials in terms of being able to crop and flip, and you certainly can't do that quite so much with a ground-based.
You kind of need it in a way too, because a lot of the time you're not in the position you want to get to, and you don't get there, and you don't get on top of it, and you don't get close enough, or you're shooting backwards. You don't want to be on top, and so there's certain compromises in moving that fast, as you well know, Lucky. So we lean into that by, I think we all shot at least sort of 50 megapixel each, and Tim, the lucky bugger, was on 100. So there's a lot of room potentially to crop in and play with images, and sometimes you can get multiple compositions out of the same frame, or even just different images.
Glad you mentioned it, Luke. I love the freedom. I feel a lot more of an artistic sort of in post. You can really, it's a nice feeling not to be constrained by a normal landscape where we know exactly what trees should look like, or I enjoy that artistic side of it, definitely. I think that's why I'm drawn to aerial stuff.
It's something too where you can use the vertical and horizontal sort of aspect tools and those kind of things, or is it, I guess it depends on how straight you want to be with your edits too, I think.
So here's that similar feature at a very different color angle, and that's kind of, is that what you were alluding to, Tim? Like
that's it, mate. Yep.
Completely monochromatic kind of aspect to it, and yet I think it was very, very close to this feature that the other one, almost like the same stream of water but further around at the top. So it would have had that blue coloration in it on a very specific angle.
I think you would have got some blue sky reflections too, which would have added to.
Pretty likely, yeah. It was a fairly blue sky day, this one. So
almost looks like a negative or something. It's just got a real kind of, otherworldly kind of feel to it.
Yeah, so there's a big finger coming through into it, and there's a reaching kind of feel out here, where it's just kind of fingers or hands are kind of pushing out, and it's, again, there's that kind of viscous kind of feeling about it as well.
Interesting image.
So there we go. So super graphic image, and I like lean into that when the features allow us to do that. So it's that dynamism between graphic man-made and organic kind of natural features that I particularly enjoy about here, and they kind of coexist quite well with each other. They're not really fighting each other, and it's almost like this little family of little amoebas is slowly moving its way out, and then one of them is dad's sort of out leading the way over here. There's different kind of quirky stories you can read into it, but that the visual aesthetic and graphic qualities here I really appreciate.
I love the simplicity of the flat color. Like, we quite often try to accentuate the contrast, but it's just nice and flat, and that's that.
Yeah, but block colors have their place, don't they?
Yes.
Like in some ways they can really add a strength to an image, and I think this is one of those examples.
This is also one of those shots where cropping is also, you could crop this so many different ways, and I'm really
I was actually thinking that
you'd have been a lot of there could be a lot of attraction to want to crop this more centrally and put that point right in the middle, and I kind of appreciate that you've done that differently, and it's more about balancing the elements than it is lining up the lines with certain points in the image itself.
We definitely went around this feature a few times. I think that's just a straight out of camera.
Right, cool.
It's not often the negative space is such a feature either. I think it's
No, not with this a huge big block of color, and that's where someone like William Turner could really come in as a paper loop, because it makes that block color an actual feature in a print.
Definitely.
And it gives it texture and shape and form that sort of wouldn't otherwise be there on a really smooth paper. Just thinking ahead exhibition wise. Let's see, very slow. Sometimes light is very slow to go next.
Wow.
I just found this one the other night when I was talking to the boys. I was just randomly going through it. It just popped in front of me, and I was like, "Oh, hello!" And it's like a Chinese water dragon.
Yeah, it's interesting. You flashed it up on screen, and both Dave and I saw different things at the same time. I think Dave saw a snake, and I saw a Chinese dragon. And,
almost like you can see it's a underground river, and you can see it sort of popping up out the other end. In the top right corner there.
It quite likely is. Like, that might be one of the natural features there before, and then just as a man-made feature block, and it has a continuation through here. So it'd be interesting to know the kind of story of how that landscape's sort of established and been altered by how it's being used. It's a salt farm. But yeah, beautiful graphic qualities again, but it has a very organic feel about it. I like that separation of very different kind of aesthetics and features in these three different areas that are being held and separated and contained, and it's sort of leaning into each other a little bit.
And the headlands on the road, it's quite interesting. The little lumps coming out the road on the right hand side, just nice little nice little points of interest your eye wanders.
Oh yeah. Here we go. Yeah, the little fingers, and I think that what ties this image together a little bit is the white area here with the white areas on the right. Like I think it kind of needs that to pull it together, left to right. And when you look at this from a distance, this whiteness here almost like makes it feel like it's bending around and giving it a bit of a dimensional kind of quality. When I look at it on a small screen like Instagram, which I put it up on the other night, it looks almost like rounded on the edges, like curved glass on the edge of an iPhone or something, which I wasn't sort of expecting until I looked at it at a different size, because images can change. David already shot a good one, so I won't spend long here, but yeah, it's definitely something we deliberately wanted to do. This is when we literally this rainstorm's just like chasing us down, and there's lightning happening over here to the right, and it was like, oh god, let's just keep going, boys. And couldn't get enough of this a lot of these beautiful storms coming through. And I've only given this 60 seconds of editing, like most of my photos. I'm not a patient editor, and I don't really use anything other than Lightroom and a few sliders. But
beautiful ribbons of rain.
Yeah, it was just
crisscross.
The crisscross as a feature, and I should probably look into this and think about how I can edit this in a way that accentuates it a little bit more, and maybe even crops it and just really leans on that feature, because it was just astonishing, so beautiful. And I haven't quite done it justice with that edit yet. Different sort of color palette, I really enjoy that muted sort of tone and the curved kind of shapes of the way they go down. And some of them are hitting the ground, some of them aren't. There's an ethereal aspect to rain sometimes when you see it from side on, which is not you often get to see it from. And sometimes it's pretty amazing when you see it flowing all the way and just not quite touching the ground. There's something just a little bit.
It's quite vintage too, probably. It's got a sort of nostalgic look to it.
Yeah, blessing. Someone's going off the choppers.
It's allergic to your image, mate.
Tim's trying to give us COVID again from afar. Right, buddy.
Yeah, give it a rest.
I'm moving on.
I'm patient zero.
Okay. Well, to me, this speaks of the absolute fierce courageousness of trying to live in a landscape like this and trying to bring creatures here. Like it's almost like the audacity and craziness of trying to, create an artificial water source to keep something alive out here is what this speaks to me, and how water sort of defines life out here. And this is a man-made version of that, but it becomes an absolute pillar and central feature in a broader landscape, and there just wouldn't be survival without it.
So it's dry too, is it? Like there's no actual water in there anymore?
Yeah, it looks like it's just drying out. I mean, you can see that it's literally plants are growing in there, but it's kind of, I just look at it and I just go, just the harshness of the place and the aridity and just the fierceness of the landscape and the fierceness of the courage to try and move into it and thrive in it and live in it, and how.
What makes this image for me, Paul, is the kind of contrast between the animal tracks and the vehicle tracks. It's kind of like a hard contrast or a hard juxtaposition that,
Yeah,
like the animals need to go to the water and head into the center, and the tracks don't need to, so they're all
exactly
other directions.
Yeah, it's a subtle image, but it has a really strong narrative, I think, which I really enjoy leading into, and I think the color palette is quite subtle but quite elegant.
It talks to the story of the project, definitely.
Yeah, like I found this after we had that conversation last night about just choosing images that really spoke to the themes of the project in particular.
We just had a comment too. It looks a bit like a sports stadium, perhaps as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it kind of does.
Yeah. Doesn't it? Yeah.
And this might have been completely different the week before we were there. It might have been dry and arid, and it literally had floods through it in recent times, and life was just exploding out here. And I was seeing so many images out here where it's basically almost black and white, and that the land is completely parched, and there's just a shimmering of white in what's left of the water and the waterways. And I just spoke to the vivacity of life, I think, to me, and again that kind of flood drought cycle that it really speaks to. And here, life's kind of overwhelming the aridity of the landscape, and that's where the boom or bust sort of comes in, and that's speaking of boom time to me.
The thing that really surprised me was just how vast this country was. That flood country just expanded as far as the eye could see in all directions. It was
definitely, yeah, that blew me away the first time I saw it. It's just the sheer scale of these river systems, so flat and so wide, and Just
This is the tail end of the Warburton. This is the Warburton Groove. So this is the main entrance way traditionally for water to enter Lake Eyre. And it flows down right down to the far kind of southwest corner, and it doesn't start pooling until it gets to the bottom. And often it'll just stop here, and you can literally watch it slowly move, and you can almost see it moving from the sky. And I have a personal love affair with this particular waterway. Every time I fly it, and I've flown it many times, I just can't get enough. I don't think it's the most flattering shot of it, but it speaks again to the just massive broadness of this landscape. Just how immense it is, and how water has its, even in those arid places, it still has its powerful shaping force. Karitanda, speaking of water, and again, that speaks to that conversation again, but there's almost like this strangely painted quality going here through the water, which I just quite enamored by, and I think I'm not sure how much of it is the way the light's reflecting off the water as opposed to the water itself. But it's kind of alliterating in the water, kind of what's happening in the environment around it. Beautiful swirls, shapes, depth, design. I think green and purple are a really beautiful color palette. I'm really drawn to those two together. Lots of texture. Yeah, and you just come across these magical fairy creatures or sea anemones or whatever you want to call them. And it just speaks back to a timelessness or an ancientness and the kind of creatures that we were born from, and that still have a role to this day in terms of how life lives and is created. And that's a bit more of a metaphorical kind of or symbolic kind of representation of that. But it's kind of what it speaks to me, like this early life and that kind of almost like amoebic kind of form and
ochre color,
branching out. And I'd be interested to see that prints actually with this the softness and almost like that Aboriginal dot painting kind of type technique around the sides, and this interesting pocket of really intense little texture here, and these kind of fluid kind of waterways. It's a very unusual composition, but I think I still kind of appreciate it. It's a quirky one, but it kind of appeals to me. It's funny, like going through when you got thousands of images, you just pop back through. It's every time you go through, something jumps out that you never even noticed before. And it's kind of like that every time when you have such a large volume of work. This was my vanilla chocolate cake. When I saw this from a distance, I just went, hells yeah, boys, we're going over there. And it was just these gorgeous layers of chocolate browns and tans. And it was just, it wasn't easy to photograph compositionally, but geez, it was stunning, wasn't it, fellas?
It's just so different, wasn't it? Unexpected, I guess.
I've never seen anything like it in Karitunda before either, to be honest. And on a flow over it that many times, I think it's partly why I was so enamored. And most of the lake was like this. It was really from a pure color point of view, it was quite featureless. Probably the least featured I've seen in quite some time, actually. But and it made an area of color that's really stand out even more. And just because it doesn't have color doesn't mean it's not incredible to photograph in terms of its textural qualities and shapes as well. But it's just different every time. Like I almost don't stress about when I go to Karitunda anymore because it's just good every time in a different way. But I know these areas here, and I saw a photograph of it literally the next day. It had literally turned pink overnight from the rain that followed down behind us. This is my take on kind of what you'd shown before, David. That's actually a reflection of a cloud and a really, really shallow kind of open sort of waterway. And it speaks a little, it looks a bit like a double exposure really to me. And it's a single capture and it's kind of, it's moving in that kind of, that spiritual kind of realm. It's quite otherworldly and it speaks through that and that transparency that you're seeing through to a landscape. I kind of appreciate and the way it even changes the color palette underneath it subtly as well. It's I don't know, what do you think, fellas?
Yeah, I love that. You don't often get it. It's a bit like up there for cloud cover over Lake Eyre. It's often blue skies, but when you get that, the wispy sort of cloud, it's a beautiful effect. It does add volumes to the end image, just deepens the mystery.
Yeah, it might actually be a different lake, actually. Now that I think about it, I think it might have been.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah.
Another one earlier on the trip, but some really interesting qualities to that one. And ethereal sort of comes to mind. This one in particular, I think. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Like it's just It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's toxic. It's wild.
It's terrible. It's
arresting. It's
Grotesque beauty.
fucking intriguing. It's yeah, like I've never seen. I don't think I've come across a mine that big actually. I think that's the biggest one of the biggest ones I've ever seen.
It's hard to do it with scale, really, isn't it? To do it.
Yeah, and like you probably recognise that a lot of our work is abstract, and it's not necessarily giving scale or very location focused. It's more about the features that we want to lean into, I guess, that we're more intrigued by as visual artists. And I think Tim and David and I are all on similar lines there. I'll keep whipping through because we probably give everyone a bit of a break. Actually, I'll just check how many got left. Subtle textural features. That's an example of a really kind of wide open thing. That's just straight looking out of the plane going, oh my God, where the hell are we? What has the universe created around us? Like, just the feeling I had like that sometimes looking out the window just on this trip was just quite astonishing. Really.
What I love about that image, Paul, is that it provides context to all of the abstracts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was quite conscious of that. We hadn't really
all the little photos in there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we hadn't really gone broad on almost any of these, and I did deliberately want to put one in just to give a sense of actually what it's like. That's literally just looking straight out the window, just as we were flying. And
that's part of the creative process, like seeing those features and then communicating with Steve to say, I want to be over that. You can sort of see, pre-visualize what you'll see once you're over that point.
We did a lot of features back around here. I think we love the alliteration of these here. I think that island sat really beautifully in a pocket. I think there's other things happening over here. This was a really striking feature, obviously, and I've had a professional geologist look at this, and he can't quite figure out, where those come from. But just to give you a little bit of a quick sort of wider sense, and then again straight back into that detailed work. And I don't think I've ever seen an alga bloom this powerful and as strong and as striking. This isn't the one image to do it justice, but it speaks to the quality of it. Like I've never seen that level of coloration, and it's such a broad, expansive area. It's sort of repeated around so many different sort of landforms, and it was just, it's one of the most astonishing areas I've ever photographed, I think. And we literally came across it by accident, and quite likely this doesn't exist anymore. One rainfall or the algae sort of dies away and it's all gone. And it was because we'd taken the direction from that local farmer to go in a certain direction first that we ended up entering another feature further along at a different angle that we probably wouldn't have gotten to, and that's where we found it. So definitely a bit of luck there. It almost speaks of sound to me. How if you run sound over liquid, it can move and reverberate and flick around. And I think almost at the end here, boys. Yes, I think it's my lucky last one. So this was literally just before we landed. And I remember the boys saying, "Oh, you should get one of the features there." So if I don't tell you what that is, you might not figure it out. But it's kind of these sandy sandbanks on the edge of the ocean, actually, very, very close to where we were landing, and the coloration was pretty divine in terms of what was happening all around us. So I'm going to wrap that up with my last photograph there, fellas, because
well done, Paul. That's an amazing set, and it's the best view of you have had all show, I think.
Nice.
Has my camera died? Oh shit.
Yeah, it's all good. You're
you must have been sending me messages.
Mode, so
there we go.
But
well, wasn't about the photos, not me.
Thanks so much for sharing that incredible journey with us. And it looks like the amount of planning that you put into it just really paid off so handsomely. And I'm a huge advocate of planning and to execute something like that, especially with all of the remote landings and all of the far-flung places that you're at. You have to really know what you're doing and have plenty of plans. Didn't really even talk about where you stayed or how a lot of the more logistics sort of aspects panned out, but I guess that's all part of the mystery as well.
Part of the mystery, that's fine.
Yeah.
So just so everyone knows, and we actually have launched the film with you tonight, and we're also going to launch the website that Tim amazingly has set up for us, which I'll quickly show you. So we didn't really reiterate, to be honest, that the oh god, I've kind of lost it already.
Luke Shark.
I'm rushing because it's the end of the show. Is this it? No,
That would be my website. That one.
Oh shit! All right, I'll not share screen and find it quickly.
www.altitudesouth.com.
Or does somebody else have it ready? Because I'm embarrassing myself.
This is how you use Google.
And the amazingly professional.
Hit enter. Hit enter.
There we go. So there we go. So Tim did a bloody brilliant job pulling this together, and you can see, this incredible feature that we were talking about earlier that that Tim's made a feature of the show. So there's a little bit of background on us fellas, and Tim's done a brilliant job of actually pulling these quotes out of the film and some of the audio quality. So he obviously put a lot of thought into finding those.
A hell of a blue steel though too, by the way.
I don't know who took those photos. How's that blue steel, man? Holy shit.
Yeah.
Somebody took some nice shots, and
Small
portfolio of each of our work through there.
Wow.
For starters, and this is just the start of our site, but it is a good landing point. And if you want to relive the video, it's right here.
I love the title, by the way, too, of the project.
Yeah, I mean, we probably should have. I was going to pump up the video before we talked about it. We just chucked it straight on. But Altitude South is, to me, it's a contemporary kind of word. It speaks obviously to the aerial qualities. It defines the South Australian kind of physical quality of where we wanted to create boundaries around the project. So we spent quite a lot of time, probably months actually in some ways, thinking about what to call a project. I think it works really well.
Yeah, I do too. I love it.
So we'll finish off the show, but basically our original intention, and we're still planning and moving in this direction, is to create a beautiful physical body of work to exhibit and travel around, and also to move into creating a fine art book in a way that we're happy to take enough time to really get it at the caliber we want to do. And with the film and the website and some of the body of work, we potentially got the capacity to reach out for an arts grant in South Australia to speak about that contemporary kind of snapshot of the currency of the wider landscape of South Australia.
I'm sure there's a lot of South Australians that would have an idea that the landscape looks like that too,
Yeah, so plenty more to come, and we weren't sure if we were going to release it publicly like this before we kind of had those things running and in place, but we decided to go ahead, and it's a wonderful platform to share, and we're pretty proud to have launched it with you all tonight. I hope you've really enjoyed that, and feel free to reach out and contact us with anything about it.
Absolutely.
Hats off to you fellas.
Yeah, well done, guys.
And Steve, of course.
And,
Steve, we love
thanks for sharing that with us. And I'm sure it's not the last time we'll hear about the project and all the great things that you guys are doing there.
Thanks for having us. Yeah,
much appreciated.
Very welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys taking the time. On a slight logistical note, Luke and I have set up a King Island and a Tarkine workshop, and then King Island sold out in 3 days with 14 places. And the Tarkine workshop's already sold out, and people are already on the waiting list. So we set up another one for late February. So if you're interested to heading out with Luke and I, and I highly recommend it because it'll be epic. We've got another one in late February to one of my most favorite areas on planet Earth, which is the Tarkine. So just look up Tscharke.com and look up the workshop session, and you'll find an expression of interest there ready to go.
Yep. Yeah, we'll have that up pretty soon as well. So yeah, very much excited about having another one and having a lot of viewers joining us and having some pretty cool adventures in the process. So it should be pretty cool.
Yeah, you can get him to put a hug to the face. Stand his face for 2.5 years. You get to see the real deal. You get to see the rest of the body now,
Well, thanks so much for so many of you hanging on there, and I think it's probably a record episode, or it'd have to be pretty similar to the aerial special we had many moons ago.
Worth it, boys. Thanks for your patience, Lukey, for letting us.
No, that's quite okay, and it's just always lovely to see such a well-considered, thoughtful body of work put together, and it's what I really enjoy is seeing the collaboration aspect of photography really shining through, and each of you guys bringing different strengths to the project. And it's really lovely to see that. And I'd love to see much more of it happening between photographers as well. I think aerial is a really nice way to do that, because you're all in the same journey together. But yeah, no, it's I just thought I'd add that as a congratulations, and yeah, can't wait to see the full. I'll have to go to the website now and pour over the shots. Yeah,
great.
They're not all there yet. We've only uploaded 9 each.
There's 19,930 photographs you haven't seen yet. So.
No, that's great. Well, we'll probably leave it there then. Thanks so much for all of you again joining us. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time as per our new schedule. And until then, have a lovely time, and we'll catch you soon.
All right, everyone. Thanks again, fellas.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.